Imagine stepping into a store, expecting kindness, and instead facing deep humiliation. In today's story, a young girl named Katie experiences just that, unfairly accused of a crime she didn't commit, simply because of her appearance. But what the store staff doesn't realize is that Katie's father holds a surprising position of authority that will turn this injustice on its head. Stay with us as we unfold a powerful story of dignity, redemption, and the consequences of prejudice. If you're ready for a story of courage in the face of discrimination, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's dive in. Katie Johnson had always heard stories about the luxurious jewelry store her father protected as the local sheriff. Her father, Sheriff Johnson, often told her how important it was to watch over everyone in their town, from the wealthy store owners to the children playing in the park. And as a young girl of 10, Katie was proud of her father and loved to imagine the elegance of the jewelry store he spoke of. Today, Katie had the chance to see it all with her own eyes. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and her father had finally agreed to let her visit the store on her own, just for a few minutes. He had some errands nearby and told her he'd be back shortly. Katie felt a surge of excitement. She had dressed in her best clothes, a pale blue dress with little white flowers, and her dark hair was neatly tied with a ribbon. She felt as if she belonged in a beautiful place like the store, and she couldn't wait to see the sparkling jewels her father had described so vividly. As she pushed open the heavy glass door, a small bell above it chimed, announcing her arrival. Katie took a deep breath and looked around, her eyes widening as she took in the sights. The room was bathed in warm, golden light that reflected off every glass surface, making the entire store appear to shimmer. Elegant displays held necklaces, rings, bracelets, and earrings that sparkled as if each gemstone held a tiny piece of sunlight. Katie stepped forward, her footsteps soft on the plush carpet. She felt a mix of awe and pride as she looked around. She was, after all, in a place her father protected. She carefully made her way toward a display case near the front of the store. Inside, on a velvet cushion, lay a necklace with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Katie had never seen anything so beautiful in her life. She leaned closer, admiring the way the gemstone seemed to glow in the light. Just as she was lost in her admiration, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Can I help you with something?" The voice was sharp, each word clipped as if they had been carefully weighed and found wanting. Katie looked up to see a woman standing on the other side of the display. She was tall, with neatly styled hair and a rigid, formal expression that didn't soften as she looked down at Katie. Her name tag read Ms. White. Katie smiled politely, feeling a little shy but determined to make a good impression. "No, thank you. I'm just looking." Ms. White narrowed her eyes, a frown forming on her lips. She looked Katie up and down, her gaze lingering on Katie's simple dress and the small backpack she carried. "Are you sure? You don't look like you can afford anything in here." Katie felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her cheeks. She hadn't come to buy anything, just to admire the beautiful things her father had told her about. She glanced around the room, suddenly feeling small and out of place. But she reminded herself that her father had always told her to be polite, no matter what. "Yes, ma'am," Katie replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just wanted to see the jewelry. My dad told me it's very pretty." Ms. White's frown deepened, and she crossed her arms. "Your dad? Does he work here?" she asked, her tone laced with disbelief. Katie hesitated. "No, he's the sheriff," she replied softly, hoping that mentioning her father's position would reassure the woman. But instead, Ms. White's expression grew even colder. "Well, sheriff's daughter or not, this isn't a playground. Don't touch anything," Ms. White snapped, her voice low but filled with irritation. She turned away, muttering under her breath as she walked to the other side of the store. Katie felt her heart sink. She hadn't meant to upset anyone. She had simply wanted to see the jewels her father had told her so much about. Taking a deep breath, she decided to keep to herself and just look from a distance. She didn't want to give Ms. White any more reason to be upset. For a while, Katie wandered around the store quietly, admiring the displays from a distance. She found herself drawn to a small pendant with a tiny bird carved out of emerald, nestled in a gold setting. It reminded her of a necklace her mother used to wear. Katie smiled softly, feeling a pang of sadness mixed with happiness as she thought of her mother. Just as she was lost in her memories, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Startled, she turned around to see Ms. White standing behind her, her face filled with suspicion. "What's in your backpack?" she demanded. Katie blinked in surprise, confused by the woman's harsh tone. Just my book and a snack," she replied, her voice small and uncertain. Ms. White's eyes narrowed further. "Let me see," she ordered, her voice brooking no argument. Katie hesitated, not understanding why the woman was so angry. But she didn't want to cause any trouble, so she slowly opened her backpack and showed Ms. White the contents. Inside were her favorite storybook and a small apple her father had given her. Ms. White looked through the backpack with a look of disdain, as if she didn't believe Katie. "You know," she said slowly, "we have very valuable items here. It's not a place for just anyone to wander around." Katie felt her heart pound in her chest. She didn't like the way Ms. White was looking at her, as if she didn't belong, as if she had done something wrong. She thought of her father's words about always standing up for herself, but she felt too intimidated to say anything back. "Now, I suggest you leave before you cause any more trouble," Ms. White continued, her voice hard and unkind. Katie swallowed, feeling tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She didn't understand why this woman was treating her like this, but she knew she didn't want to stay any longer. Taking a shaky breath, Katie nodded and started to turn toward the door. Just then, she heard Ms. White mutter something under her breath. Something about people who don't belong here. Katie didn't understand exactly what Ms. White meant, but she felt the sting of rejection and the weight of Ms. White's disapproval pressing down on her small shoulders. As Katie pushed the door open and stepped back into the bright sunlight, she felt a mixture of sadness and confusion. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet she felt as though she had somehow disappointed her father. She decided to wait for him outside, hoping that he wouldn't be too long. Before we continue with this heartwarming story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This is how you can contribute and help us continue bringing meaningful stories about justice and overcoming challenges. Click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's keep going. Katie waited outside the jewelry store, leaning against the wall, trying to ignore the tight knot of discomfort twisting in her stomach. She had never been made to feel so unwelcome anywhere, and she couldn't understand why Ms. White had treated her with such harshness. Her father had always told her to believe in the goodness of people, to treat others with respect. Yet Ms. White had treated her as though she were an intruder, someone who didn't belong. As Katie stood there, lost in thought, the door of the jewelry store swung open behind her, and she heard a familiar, sharp voice. You didn't go far, did you?" Ms. White's voice carried an edge of irritation as she looked down at Katie, who stood frozen, unsure of what to say. Katie turned slowly, her gaze falling to the ground as she replied softly, "I was just waiting for my dad. He's coming to pick me up." Ms. White huffed, crossing her arms. "Your dad? Huh? And I suppose he's coming here to buy you some jewelry?" Her tone was biting, almost mocking, as though the very idea of Katie's father shopping there was absurd. Katie felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but she looked up, her voice shaking a little. He's the sheriff. I'm not here to buy anything. I just wanted to see the store." Ms. White's lips twisted into a sneer. "The sheriff? Is he? Then he ought to teach you some manners. Children should know their place and not wander into places they don't belong." Katie felt her throat tighten, but she bit back her tears. "I didn't mean any harm," she whispered, more to herself than to Ms. White. "Well, harm or not, we don't take kindly to people snooping around here, especially when they have no business here." Ms. White's gaze turned colder, her eyes narrowing as she seemed to assess Katie's every move. Before Katie could respond, Ms. White stepped forward and, to Katie's surprise, grabbed her by the arm. "Come back inside," she ordered. "If you're innocent, then you won't mind answering a few questions." Katie winced at the strength of Ms. White's grip, but she didn't resist, too stunned by the woman's sudden aggression to protest. She allowed herself to be led back into the store, her heart pounding as she tried to process what was happening. Inside, Ms. White released Katie's arm with a little shove, causing her to stumble slightly. Katie's gaze darted around the store, hoping someone would intervene. But the few customers inside seemed too absorbed in their own conversations to notice. Ms. White straightened, her face set in a severe expression as she pointed to Katie's small backpack. "Empty it. Right here. Let's see what you've got hidden in there." Katie blinked, confused and hurt. Why do you think I took something?" she asked, her voice trembling. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being treated like a criminal. Ms. White folded her arms, her gaze unwavering. "Let's just say we've had our share of people like you thinking they could get away with things here." Katie's brows knit in confusion. "People like me?" Ms. White's expression hardened further. "Yes, people who think they can come in here, take what they like, and slip away unnoticed. It's time someone taught you a lesson." Katie took a shaky breath, her fingers trembling as she slowly opened her backpack. She pulled out her book and the apple her father had packed for her. She looked up at Ms. White, her eyes wide and pleading. "This is all I have. I didn't take anything, I promise," Ms. White sneered, glancing at the items with disdain. "A book and an apple, is it? Convenient story. But I know better than to take the word of a thief." Katie felt the sting of tears in her eyes. "I'm not a thief," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ms. White leaned in close, her voice cold and menacing. "Oh, really? Then why were you lingering by the cases, looking at things you couldn't possibly afford?" Katie tried to hold her ground, even though she felt a wave of nausea from the intensity of Ms. White's gaze. "I was just looking. I didn't touch anything." "Looking," Ms. White repeated mockingly. "People like you don't just look. You either take what you want, or you make trouble." At that moment, the door opened, and in walked a tall, sturdy figure, Sheriff Johnson. He spotted Katie immediately, noticing her distressed expression and the way she clutched her backpack close to her chest. Concern flickered across his face as he strode forward. "Katie," he called out, his voice firm yet filled with warmth. Katie turned to him, relief flooding her face as she saw her father. Ms. White's eyes widened slightly as she realized who he was, but she quickly straightened, her posture tense. "Sheriff Johnson," she greeted him stiffly, forcing a thin smile. "We were just having a little chat." Sheriff Johnson's gaze hardened as he looked between Katie and Ms. White. "A little chat?" he echoed, his voice cold. "From where I'm standing, it looks like more than a chat." "Katie, are you all right?" Katie nodded, though she didn't meet his eyes. "I'm fine, Dad," she whispered, clutching her backpack tighter. Ms. White cleared her throat, trying to maintain her composure. "Your daughter was acting suspiciously, Sheriff. I simply asked her to explain herself." "Explain herself?" Sheriff Johnson's tone grew sharper. "She's a child. And last I checked, admiring jewelry isn't a crime." Ms. White's face flushed, but she didn't back down. "Sheriff, you must understand. We have valuable items here. We can't just let anyone wander around unsupervised." Sheriff Johnson took a step closer, his expression darkening. "Anyone? My daughter is anyone to you?" Ms. White swallowed, visibly uncomfortable under his intense gaze. "Sheriff, I didn't mean it that way. I was only doing my duty, protecting the store." "Protecting it from what?" Sheriff Johnson's voice was low and dangerous. "From a 10-year-old girl? My daughter? She came here to see the place, and you treated her like a criminal. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Ms. White's composure wavered, and for the first time, a hint of fear appeared in her eyes. I only thought." "You didn't think at all," Sheriff Johnson interrupted, his voice filled with quiet fury. "You saw her and made assumptions. You treated her unfairly, without a shred of decency." Katie watched her father, feeling a strange mixture of relief and pride as he defended her. Sheriff Johnson turned back to Katie, his gaze softening as he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Katie, honey, did you take anything?" he asked softly. Katie shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "No, Dad. I just wanted to see the jewelry. I didn't mean any harm." Sheriff Johnson nodded, then looked back at Ms. White, his face like stone. "You accused my daughter without any evidence, insulted her, and even went as far as to search her belongings. This isn't just unprofessional, it's harassment. Ms. White tried to regain her composure. "Sheriff, please, I was only—" "Enough," Sheriff Johnson said firmly. "You've done more than enough already. I suggest you prepare yourself for the consequences of this disgraceful behavior." Ms. White fell silent, her face pale. She seemed to realize the gravity of the situation, yet she couldn't find the words to defend herself. Sheriff Johnson held his gaze on Ms. White, his eyes cold and unyielding. The weight of his presence seemed to settle heavily in the room, silencing the few customers who had been watching from a distance. They were no longer just bystanders, their curiosity morphing into discomfort as they began to realize the gravity of the situation. Ms. White tried to straighten herself, her face pale but determined to regain control. "Sheriff, I was only acting in the best interest of the store. We have policies, you see, to protect the merchandise. It's my responsibility to follow those policies." "Policies?" Sheriff Johnson's voice was barely above a whisper, but every word was laced with quiet fury. "You think harassing a child, a 10-year-old girl, is a matter of policy?" Ms. White swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Sheriff, please try to understand. We often get individuals who don't belong here, who come in with intentions other than purchasing. I was merely being vigilant." Katie's eyes flickered to her father, sensing his rising anger, and she reached out, touching his arm gently. "Dad, it's okay," she whispered, though her voice was shaky. She didn't want to cause any more trouble. Sheriff Johnson looked down at her, his gaze softening for a moment. "Katie, it's not okay. No one has the right to treat you like this." He turned back to Ms. White, his expression hardening once more. "You have a responsibility, Ms. White, yes, but not to humiliate or accuse people without any cause. Especially not children. Did you stop to ask Katie anything? Did you even consider that she might just be here out of curiosity?" Ms. White's jaw tightened, and she looked away, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. "Sheriff, with all due respect, you may not understand the challenges we face. People can be deceptive. They can pretend to be innocent." Sheriff Johnson raised an eyebrow, his voice cutting. "Deceptive? You looked at my daughter, and you judged her based on nothing more than your own assumptions. You didn't see a little girl. You saw something else, didn't you?" Ms. White flinched, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, but her tone was defensive, her discomfort evident. Sheriff Johnson's voice grew louder, his anger barely restrained. "Did you even ask her who she was? Did you consider, for one moment, that she might be here for an innocent reason?" Ms. White's face flushed. "I know. I didn't think to ask. I thought—" "You thought wrong." Sheriff Johnson's words cut through the air like a knife, and a tense silence settled over the room. The few customers nearby exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of whether to leave or stay. Just then, a young employee emerged from the back of the store, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. She hesitated, glancing at Ms. White as if unsure whether to intervene. "Excuse me, Sheriff," the young woman said nervously, stepping forward. Is everything all right?" Ms. White shot her a sharp look, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Everything is under control, Claire," she said tightly. But the young woman, Claire, seemed unconvinced. Sheriff Johnson looked at her, his gaze softening slightly. "Were you here when my daughter first arrived?" he asked, his tone gentler. Claire nodded, wringing her hands nervously. "Yes, sir. I was in the back, but I saw her when she came in. She was just looking around. She didn't do anything wrong." Ms. White's lips thinned, and she looked away, her face red with embarrassment. Sheriff Johnson turned back to her, his gaze sharp. "So, even your own employee saw that Katie did nothing wrong. Yet you took it upon yourself to accuse her." Ms. White fumbled for words, her expression twisting with frustration. "Sheriff, I was only doing my job." Sheriff Johnson's patience finally seemed to snap. "Doing your job? You don't even know what that means, clearly. A good job would involve treating everyone with respect, understanding, and fairness. But instead, you used your position to belittle and mistreat a child." Katie looked around, noticing that more customers were gathering, watching the exchange with expressions of curiosity and discomfort. She shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of their stares, but she remained by her father's side, sensing his determination to stand up for her. Ms. White's voice dropped, her tone defensive as she tried to regain control of the situation. "Sheriff, you don't understand. We can't just allow anyone to wander around. It's my responsibility." "Your responsibility?" Sheriff Johnson interrupted, his voice like steel. "You're responsible for providing good service, for treating people with respect, not for assuming the worst of someone simply because they don't look like your typical customer." Ms. White's face flushed an even deeper red, and she struggled to maintain her composure. "Sheriff, with all due respect, I was simply following standard protocol." Sheriff Johnson shook his head, his tone growing even colder. "If this is what you consider protocol, then I'd say your protocol needs a serious overhaul. This behavior is unacceptable." Ms. White opened her mouth to respond, but just then, the door opened again, and two police officers walked in. One of them, Officer Mills, recognized Sheriff Johnson immediately and approached him, looking confused. "Sheriff Johnson, is everything all right here?" Officer Mills asked, glancing between him, Katie, and Ms. White. Sheriff Johnson nodded to him, his expression still hard. "Officer Mills, there's a misunderstanding here. My daughter was wrongfully accused and mistreated by this store employee, Ms. White." Officer Mills raised his eyebrows, glancing at Ms. White, who looked mortified. "Is that true, Ms. White?" he asked, his tone stern. Ms. White's voice faltered as she tried to respond. I thought I was following the store's procedures. I was just being cautious." Officer Mills shook his head, his expression disapproving. "Ms. White, caution is one thing, but making assumptions and treating people poorly isn't part of our job as citizens. The sheriff's daughter or not, you should have exercised better judgment." Ms. White's shoulders slumped, the realization of her mistake finally sinking in. She looked around at the growing crowd, the eyes of the customers and employees bearing down on her with a mix of pity and disdain. Sheriff Johnson placed a protective hand on Katie's shoulder, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Katie, are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Katie nodded, though she still felt the sting of humiliation. "I'm okay, Dad. I didn't understand why she thought I did something wrong." Sheriff Johnson looked back at Ms. White, his voice firm. "You owe my daughter an apology." Ms. White hesitated, her pride warring with the shame that was now evident on her face. Finally, she looked at Katie, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Katie. I misjudged you." Katie looked at her, her young face a mixture of confusion and sadness. "Why did you think I'd done something wrong?" she asked softly. Ms. White's face twisted with guilt, and she looked away, unable to answer. Sheriff Johnson watched her for a moment before speaking. "Ms. White, actions have consequences. I'll be filing a report with the store owner and recommending a review of your position here. This behavior cannot be tolerated." Ms. White's face turned ashen, and she opened her mouth to protest but stopped, realizing that any further argument would only make things worse. As the tension in the store continued to grow, the door opened once more, and an elderly man in a sharp, tailored suit walked in. His presence immediately drew attention, and the gathered customers and employees turned to him in silent expectation. It was Mr. Thompson, the owner of the jewelry store, a man known for his strict professionalism and high standards. Mr. Thompson's eyes swept the room, noticing the sheriff, the two officers, Ms. White, and Katie standing close to her father. His gaze finally settled on Ms. White, his brow furrowing with concern and a hint of irritation. "Ms. White," he called out in a low, steady voice that held both authority and disappointment. "What is the meaning of this?" Ms. White visibly paled as Mr. Thompson approached, her face reflecting both surprise and dread. She opened her mouth, fumbling for words. "Mr. Thompson, I was just doing my duty, sir." Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, his tone sharp. "Your duty? I was informed that there was some sort of disturbance involving a child." Sheriff Johnson stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Sheriff Johnson. This is my daughter, Katie." He placed a comforting hand on Katie's shoulder, his gaze hardening as he turned back to Ms. White. Your employee here saw fit to accuse my daughter of theft without any evidence, simply because she didn't look like she belonged. Mr. Thompson's expression shifted, a flicker of shock crossing his face before it was quickly masked by professionalism. He looked at Ms. White, his voice dropping to a colder, sharper tone. Is this true, Ms. White? Ms. White stammered, her gaze flickering between Mr. Thompson and the sheriff. Mr. Thompson, I was only trying to protect the store. You know how important it is to keep an eye out for potential risks. Potential risks? Mr. Thompson's voice was laced with disbelief. He looked at Katie, his expression softening slightly as he took in her small, innocent face. She clung to her father, her gaze downcast, visibly affected by the situation. Turning back to Ms. White, Mr. Thompson's tone grew even colder. Ms. White, how exactly did you determine that this young girl was a risk? Did she do anything suspicious? Did she act in any way that justified your actions? Ms. White hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. No, not exactly. But she was looking at the jewelry, and I thought it was unusual. Sheriff Johnson's jaw tightened as he watched Ms. White struggle to defend herself. Unusual? He echoed, his tone filled with barely restrained anger. A child admiring jewelry is unusual to you? Mr. Thompson looked around, noticing the growing crowd of onlookers, many of whom had been in the store long enough to witness the entire incident. He cleared his throat, addressing the sheriff directly. Sheriff Johnson, I want to apologize on behalf of the store. This is certainly not how we conduct business here. Sheriff Johnson nodded, though his gaze remained stern. An apology is appreciated, Mr. Thompson, but the damage has been done. My daughter has been humiliated and treated like a criminal. There needs to be accountability for this. Mr. Thompson sighed, his face tightening with regret. He turned to Ms. White, his gaze unwavering. Ms. White, do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Ms. White's face turned a deep shade of red, and she glanced around the room, her discomfort growing as the weight of her actions began to settle on her. I didn't mean to cause any harm, Mr. Thompson. I only wanted to protect the store. Mr. Thompson's expression hardened. Protect it from what, exactly? This is a 10-year-old girl, Ms. White. And more than that, she is a guest in this store, just like any other customer. We do not make assumptions about people based on their appearance or their perceived status. Is that understood? Ms. White nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, sir. The sheriff, watching the exchange, could sense that Ms. White's discomfort was growing, but he felt little sympathy. He looked down at Katie, who seemed to be holding back tears, her small hand clutching his tightly. Mr. Thompson noticed Katie's distress and knelt down, his expression softening as he addressed her directly. Katie, is it? I'm truly sorry for what happened here today. I hope you know that this isn't how we treat our guests. You're welcome here anytime, and I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. Katie looked up at him, her voice soft but steady. Thank you, sir. I didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Thompson nodded, his gaze filled with compassion. I know, Katie, and I'm sorry you were made to feel otherwise. Ms. White's discomfort seemed to reach its peak, and she finally spoke up, her voice laced with a hint of desperation. Mr. Thompson, please, I've been a loyal employee for years. I made a mistake, but it was only because I was trying to do my job. You know how careful we have to be. Mr. Thompson's gaze turned icy as he straightened. Ms. White, loyalty is commendable, but it does not excuse poor judgment or discriminatory behavior. I expect all of my employees to exercise fairness and respect towards every customer. Today, you failed to do so, Sheriff Johnson added, his voice steady. Ms. White, treating my daughter this way is not only unprofessional, it's a form of prejudice. You saw her and immediately decided she didn't belong, based on nothing but your own biases. Ms. White looked down, her face flushed with shame. I'm sorry, Sheriff. I was wrong. The customers in the store murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others looking at Ms. White with visible disappointment. The officers, who had remained silent, exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the seriousness of the situation. Mr. Thompson turned back to Sheriff Johnson. "Sheriff, please rest assured that I will be addressing this matter appropriately. Ms. White will face disciplinary actions, and we'll be reviewing our policies to ensure that this type of incident doesn't happen again." Sheriff Johnson nodded, though he was still visibly upset. "I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson, but this isn't just about discipline. This is about treating people with respect. Katie deserves that much." Katie looked up at her father, feeling a surge of pride and relief that he had stood up for her. Her small hand tightened around his, and she leaned against him, feeling safe in his protective presence. Mr. Thompson sighed, a look of regret settling on his face as he addressed the customers and employees. "I want to thank everyone for their patience, and I apologize for the disruption. This is not the standard of service we uphold, and we'll do everything in our power to prevent this from happening again." Ms. White took a shaky breath, her voice subdued as she addressed Katie. "Katie, I'm truly sorry. I misjudged you, and I know now that it was wrong." Katie looked at her, her expression a mixture of sadness and forgiveness. She nodded slightly, her voice soft but clear. "It's okay. Just don't do it to anyone else." Ms. White looked away, clearly affected by the words, and Sheriff Johnson gave Katie a gentle squeeze on the shoulder, pride evident in his eyes. As the scene came to a close, Mr. Thompson turned to Sheriff Johnson once more. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Sheriff. I assure you that steps will be taken to ensure no child, no customer, is ever treated this way again." Sheriff Johnson nodded, his expression stern but slightly softened by the resolution. "I appreciate it, Mr. Thompson, and for Katie's sake, I hope that promise is kept." The store had grown eerily quiet, with only the murmurs of a few lingering customers punctuating the heavy silence. Sheriff Johnson remained standing near the entrance, his arm protectively around Katie. She looked up at him, sensing that her father's frustration, though partially eased by Mr. Thompson's intervention, still lingered beneath his composed exterior. Mr. Thompson, sensing the tension, turned his attention back to Sheriff Johnson. "Sheriff, I hope you understand how deeply we regret this incident. Katie should never have been subjected to such treatment. This store prides itself on welcoming all our guests, and what happened here today is simply inexcusable." Sheriff Johnson gave a curt nod, though his expression remained stern. "I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson, but words alone don't fix what's been broken. My daughter should feel safe and respected wherever she goes. Today, that trust was shattered." Mr. Thompson's face softened, and he nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right, Sheriff. Trust is a fragile thing, and when it's broken, it takes more than apologies to mend it." He turned to Ms. White, who stood nearby, still visibly shaken and avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Ms. White," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "we'll need to have a more detailed discussion about today's incident. For now, I'd like you to take the rest of the day off." Ms. White's face paled further. "Mr. Thompson, please, I can stay. I won't let this happen again." But Mr. Thompson raised a hand to silence her. "No, Ms. White. Today, you overstepped your boundaries. It's best if you take this time to reflect on your actions and consider what it means to truly serve our guests with respect." Ms. White's gaze flickered to Sheriff Johnson and Katie, her face a mixture of embarrassment and regret. She nodded slowly, accepting the decision without further argument. "Yes, Mr. Thompson," she murmured, casting one last glance at Katie before she turned and walked toward the back of the store, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As she disappeared from view, Mr. Thompson turned back to Sheriff Johnson and Katie. His expression had softened, but a sense of urgency lingered in his tone. "Sheriff, Katie, I want to make this right. Please, if there's anything more I can do, perhaps a small gesture, or something to show that we truly value our guests." Katie looked up at her father, unsure how to respond. She still felt the sting of humiliation, but a part of her wanted to believe that Mr. Thompson was sincere. Sheriff Johnson let out a slow breath, clearly weighing his words. "Mr. Thompson, the best thing you can do is to make sure this never happens again. It's not about gestures. It's about real change." Mr. Thompson nodded, understanding the weight of the sheriff's words. "You have my word, Sheriff." I'll be implementing a series of training sessions for all our employees, focusing on respect and unbiased service. I'll also review our store policies to ensure that no one, especially a child, is ever made to feel unwelcome here again. Katie felt a flicker of relief at Mr. Thompson's promise, but she was still hesitant to fully trust him. She looked up at him, her voice small but determined. Will Ms. White be part of that training too? Mr. Thompson looked at her, a hint of sadness in his eyes. Yes, Katie. She'll be required to attend. And if she's not willing to change, then she won't be allowed to work here anymore. Katie nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She felt a small sense of justice, though the hurt from Ms. White's accusations still lingered. Her father gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, silently supporting her in this moment. Just then, one of the customers, an elderly woman who had been watching the entire scene, stepped forward. She wore an expression of sympathy mixed with indignation, her hands clutching her purse tightly. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I've been shopping here for years, and I've never seen anything like this. This young girl deserves an apology from all of us." Katie looked at the woman, surprised and a bit embarrassed by the attention. The elderly woman smiled softly at her, nodding encouragingly. "Katie, dear, I hope you know that what happened today doesn't reflect on you. You're a fine young lady, and I'm sorry you had to go through this." Katie gave the woman a small, grateful smile, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling a bit of the weight lift from her shoulders. The elderly woman turned back to Mr. Thompson, her tone resolute. "I'll be watching, Mr. Thompson. If I don't see real changes here, I'll be taking my business elsewhere. And I won't be the only one." A few other customers murmured their agreement, nodding as they looked at Mr. Thompson with expectant expressions. The message was clear. They wanted action, not just words. Mr. Thompson's face grew solemn as he took in the seriousness of their expressions. "I understand, ma'am, and I assure you, changes will be made. Katie and her family deserve that much, and so does every other customer who walks through these doors." The elderly woman gave a satisfied nod, though her expression remained serious. She looked back at Katie, giving her a warm smile before she turned and left the store. The other customers slowly followed suit, casting sympathetic glances at Katie as they made their way to the exit. As the crowd thinned, Mr. Thompson turned back to Sheriff Johnson and Katie, his voice softening. "Katie, I know today was difficult for you, and there's nothing I can say to fully make up for it, but I do hope you'll give us another chance. You're always welcome here." Katie looked up at her father, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. Sheriff Johnson gave her an encouraging nod, and she took a small step forward, looking at Mr. Thompson with a newfound confidence. I hope Ms. White learns not to judge people like that anymore." Mr. Thompson gave her a respectful nod, understanding the wisdom in her words. "I hope so too, Katie. I'll do everything in my power to make sure she does." Sheriff Johnson placed a hand on Mr. Thompson's shoulder, his voice less tense but still firm. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And if there's ever a time you need guidance on implementing those changes, feel free to reach out. I want to see this store become a safe place for everyone." Mr. Thompson offered a sincere handshake, which Sheriff Johnson accepted. "Thank you, Sheriff. Your insight and support mean a great deal to us." Katie took her father's hand, feeling a sense of closure, though the day's events still echoed in her mind. As they turned to leave, she glanced back at the store, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. She knew she'd remember this experience for a long time, but she also knew her father's support and Mr. Thompson's promises had made a difference. The two of them stepped out into the sunlight, leaving behind the tension of the store. As they walked down the sidewalk, Katie looked up at her father, her heart filled with gratitude. "Dad, thank you for standing up for me." Sheriff Johnson smiled, pulling her close. "Katie, you never have to thank me for that. It's my job to protect you, and to make sure no one ever treats you unfairly." Katie leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and proud. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, kiddo," he replied, his voice filled with warmth. They continued down the sidewalk, both feeling a newfound strength in their bond, knowing that, together, they could face any challenge that came their way. After Sheriff Johnson and Katie left, the silence inside the jewelry store felt thick and tense, as if the very air had absorbed the weight of what had just transpired. Mr. Thompson, visibly shaken, took a moment to collect himself before turning to face the few remaining employees who had gathered, exchanging uneasy glances. He cleared his throat, his expression resolute. "Everyone, please gather around," he called, his voice carrying a firmness that brooked no argument. As the employees moved closer, he gave Ms. White a hard look, the disappointment in his gaze unmistakable. Claire, the young employee who had spoken up during the confrontation, looked at Ms. White with a mixture of sympathy and disapproval. She fidgeted with her hands, glancing between Mr. Thompson and Ms. White, as if unsure whether to speak. Mr. Thompson addressed the group, his tone calm but severe. "What happened here today was unacceptable. I expect all of you to understand that our store stands for respect and inclusivity, and that means treating every customer, no matter who they are, with dignity." Ms. White shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of everyone's stares on her. She looked down, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, and her usually composed demeanor was now overshadowed by visible unease. "Ms. White," Mr. Thompson said, turning his full attention to her, "do you understand the gravity of what happened here today?" Ms. White hesitated, her voice barely audible. I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to escalate like this." Claire, emboldened by Mr. Thompson's presence, stepped forward. "But you didn't even give her a chance, Ms. White. She was just a kid, looking around. You didn't see her as a customer. You saw her as a threat." Ms. White's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with a mixture of defensiveness and guilt. "I was trying to protect the store, Claire. I was doing what I thought was necessary." Mr. Thompson crossed his arms, his gaze unyielding. "Protect the store from what, Ms. White? A 10-year-old girl who was simply admiring the jewelry? That's hardly a risk." Another employee, Mark, a man in his 30s with a calm demeanor, chimed in, his voice firm. "Ms. White, we've all been here long enough to know the difference between a customer and a potential threat. Katie was clearly not here to cause trouble. You judged her before you even spoke to her." Ms. White felt her cheeks flush as her colleague's words sank in. She looked away, unwilling to meet their eyes. I know it may have looked that way, but you don't understand. I've dealt with situations before where things seemed harmless, and then they weren't." Mr. Thompson shook his head, his expression grave. "Ms. White, no one is saying we shouldn't be vigilant. But vigilance does not mean suspicion without reason, and it certainly does not mean mistreating a child." Claire took a deep breath, her voice soft but unwavering. "Katie was humiliated, Ms. White. You didn't just accuse her, you made her feel like she didn't belong. That's not how we should make anyone feel, especially a child." Ms. White's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed Claire's words. She felt the sting of shame mingling with a stubborn defensiveness that she couldn't quite let go of. "I didn't mean for her to feel that way. I was trying to do my job." Mr. Thompson's gaze softened slightly, though his voice remained stern. "Ms. White, I understand that sometimes we make choices under pressure, thinking we're doing the right thing. But part of our job here is to make people feel welcome, not to push them away." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's time we all take a step back and remember why we're here. To serve our community, not to judge them." A few other employees murmured in agreement, casting disapproving glances at Ms. White. The message was clear. Her actions had not only affected Katie and her father, but they had also fractured the trust within the team. Ms. White looked around, feeling the isolation more acutely than ever. She had always prided herself on being a senior employee, someone Mr. Thompson relied on. Now, her colleagues were looking at her as though she were a stranger, someone who had betrayed the very principles they stood for. Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the assembled employees. "Starting next week, we'll be implementing a series of training sessions to address respect, inclusivity, and customer service. This training will be mandatory for everyone, myself included. We will remind ourselves and each other of the values that define this establishment." Claire's face lit up with a hopeful smile, and she nodded in approval. "That sounds like a good step, Mr. Thompson." I think it's important for all of us. Ms. White, however, felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She knew that she was being singled out in a way, that these training sessions were largely a response to her actions. She swallowed, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke. And, if I don't agree with the changes? Mr. Thompson's gaze was steady, his tone unyielding. Then perhaps this is no longer the place for you, Ms. White. We need a team that reflects our commitment to respect and fairness. I trust that you will give this serious thought. Ms. White nodded stiffly, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. She looked down, her face pale as she realized the consequences of her actions were now inescapable. After Mr. Thompson dismissed the group, Ms. White retreated to the back of the store, hoping to gather her thoughts. Claire, who had stayed behind, approached her cautiously. Ms. White, Claire began, her voice gentle. I know this must be hard for you, but maybe this is a chance for all of us to do better. Even you. Ms. White looked up at her, bitterness flashing in her eyes. You think I'm the only one who made a mistake here, don't you? I've seen how you all look at people who don't fit in. Claire shook her head, her voice calm but firm. Ms. White, we're not perfect, but there's a difference between being cautious and making someone feel like they're nothing. You crossed that line today. Ms. White's face softened, the defensiveness fading as she met Claire's earnest gaze. Maybe you're right, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what got into me. I thought I was doing what was right. Claire nodded, her expression sympathetic. We've all made mistakes, but we learn from them, Ms. White. Maybe this is your chance to do the same. Ms. White took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping as the reality of her actions settled over her. She looked around the quiet back room, feeling a pang of regret. I don't know if I can fix this, Claire. Not after what happened. Maybe not all at once, Claire replied softly. But you can start by doing better. For Katie, and for everyone else who walks through those doors. Ms. White nodded slowly, her voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Thank you, Claire. I think I have some thinking to do. As Claire left the room, Ms. White remained behind, alone with her thoughts. The memory of Katie's small, hurt face lingered in her mind, and she knew that, somehow, she had to make it right. Not just for Katie, but for herself as well. Ms. White lingered in the break room, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the silence. The usual chatter of her colleagues in the store seemed distant, muffled by the weight of her thoughts. She could still feel the stares of her co-workers, their judgment as sharp as if they were standing right beside her. After a few minutes, Mark walked into the room, his expression a mixture of hesitation and resolve. He closed the door softly behind him and crossed his arms, watching her for a moment before speaking. Ms. White, he began, his tone gentle but firm. Do you have any idea what today looked like? From where we were standing. Ms. White looked up, a hint of defensiveness flashing in her eyes. I was just trying to be careful, Mark. You know we can't take chances with security in this store. Mark shook his head slowly, a sigh escaping his lips. Security? He repeated, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. With a child, Ms. White? A 10-year-old girl? What kind of security risk did you think she posed? Ms. White averted her gaze, her voice dropping to a murmur. I don't know. I thought maybe she was being sneaky or hiding something. Sometimes things aren't always what they seem. Mark let out a dry laugh, though there was no humor in his eyes. Not what they seem. You saw a little girl admiring jewelry, and your first instinct was to treat her like a criminal. Do you realize how that looks? Not just to her father, but to all of us. She shifted uncomfortably, his words cutting deeper than she expected. Mark, I know what it looks like, but you don't understand. I've seen things go wrong before. People taking advantage. That's not an excuse, Ms. White. Mark interrupted, his voice sterner. We all see things go wrong. But we can't treat everyone like a threat because of a few bad experiences. That's not fair. And it's definitely not who we should be. Ms. White swallowed, a lump forming in her throat as she struggled to find the right words. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think it would escalate. Mark's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained serious. Well, it did. And now, everyone in this store is looking at you differently. I know that's hard to hear, but it's the truth. Ms. White looked away, her hands trembling slightly as she absorbed his words. So, what now? Do they all just hate me for one mistake? Mark let out a deep breath, his voice softening. It's not about hate, Ms. White. People are disappointed. They expected better from you. We all did. But you still have a choice. You can make this right, or you can let it fester. Ms. White's gaze flickered to him, a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. And how do I make it right, Mark? I can't just undo what happened. No, you can't, Mark admitted, his voice firm but encouraging. But you can take responsibility. Show that you understand why what you did was wrong. Apologize to Katie if you get the chance. And maybe, over time, people will see that you're willing to learn. Ms. White's shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. I didn't realize it would come to this. Mark gave her a small, reassuring nod. Sometimes it takes something like this to open our eyes, Ms. White. But that doesn't mean it's too late to change. As Mark left the room, Ms. White sat in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. She had never thought of herself as prejudiced or unfair. In fact, she had always prided herself on being a diligent employee, someone who took her responsibilities seriously. But today, her diligence had crossed a line, and now she was left to face the consequences. After a few moments, Claire entered, her expression hesitant. She glanced at Ms. White before taking a seat across from her, folding her hands on the table. Ms. White, she began gently, I know today was difficult, but I wanted to talk to you, because I think there's something you need to hear. Ms. White looked at her, her face a mixture of shame and curiosity. What is it, Claire? Claire took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. I've worked here for a few years now, and I've always respected you. But today was different. I saw a side of you that, honestly, I didn't expect. Ms. White's face fell, and she looked away, her voice barely a whisper. I know I messed up, Claire. Claire nodded, her tone gentle but unyielding. Yes, you did. But here's the thing, Ms. White. This isn't just about one mistake. It's about the assumptions you made about Katie. Assumptions that, frankly, were unfair and hurtful. Ms. White swallowed, her gaze dropping to her hands. I thought I was doing the right thing. Claire leaned forward, her voice soft but intense. Sometimes, doing the right thing means questioning our own biases. It means taking a step back and really looking at the person in front of us, not just the fears we have in our heads. Ms. White felt her chest tighten, the reality of her actions settling over her like a dark cloud. I didn't mean to hurt her, she whispered, more to herself than to Claire. I know, Claire replied gently, but intentions don't change the impact. Katie left here feeling like she didn't belong, like she was less than others, because of how you treated her. And that's something we all need to think about, not just you. Ms. White closed her eyes, the memory of Katie's hurt expression flashing in her mind. It was as if she could still see the disappointment in the girl's eyes, the way she had clung to her father for comfort. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I want to make it right. I don't know how, but I want to try. Claire gave her a small, encouraging smile. That's a start, Ms. White. And maybe, if you're open to it, you can learn something from this. We all can. Ms. White nodded, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the shame. She knew she had a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt a genuine desire to change, to be better. Not just for Katie, but for everyone who walked through the doors of the store. As Claire left the room, Ms. White remained seated, deep in thought. The break room felt quieter than ever, the weight of her introspection settling heavily on her. She took a deep breath, her heart filled with a mixture of regret and resolve. For the first time, she realized that her role in the store wasn't just about guarding merchandise. It was about creating a space where everyone felt respected, safe, and welcome. And as painful as today had been, she knew it was a lesson she needed to learn. Later that afternoon, as the store grew quieter and the afternoon light began to soften, Ms. White stood outside Mr. Thompson's office, her hand hovering uncertainly over the door. She had never felt so vulnerable, so unsure of her place here. But after the conversations with Mark and Claire, she knew that avoiding responsibility was no longer an option. Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly, her heart pounding as she heard Mr. Thompson's calm voice from within. "Come in." She stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. Mr. Thompson sat at his desk, papers spread out in front of him, but he looked up immediately, his gaze settling on her with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. "Ms. White," he greeted, his tone neutral but measured. "What can I do for you?" She hesitated, clasping her hands together tightly. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to speak with you about today. About everything that happened." Mr. Thompson gestured to the chair in front of him. "Please sit." Ms. White lowered herself into the chair, the weight of his steady gaze making her feel even more exposed. She took another deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I know that what I did was wrong," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know that I caused a lot of harm. To Katie, to Sheriff Johnson, and to everyone else in the store." Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm glad to hear you acknowledge that, Ms. White. But understanding the harm you've caused is only the first step. What do you plan to do about it?" She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. I want to make it right. I just don't know how." Mr. Thompson leaned forward, his gaze intent. "Making things right isn't easy, Ms. White. It's not something that happens overnight. It requires genuine effort and, more importantly, a willingness to change." Ms. White swallowed, nodding slowly. "I understand that, and I want to change, but I'm not sure where to begin." Mr. Thompson's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained serious. "Start by recognizing why you made the assumptions you did. This isn't just about one mistake, Ms. White. It's about understanding the attitudes and beliefs that led you to treat Katie the way you did." She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. I think I've spent so long trying to protect the store, watching for any sign of trouble, that I forgot to see people for who they really are. I got too caught up in my own fears and prejudices." Mr. Thompson tilted his head, studying her intently. "And do you understand what that means for your role here?" Ms. White hesitated, her throat tight. "It means I haven't been doing my job the way I should. I thought I was protecting the store, but I was really just letting my own biases guide me." Mr. Thompson nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Acknowledging that is an important step. But there's more to it, Ms. White. You need to actively work to change those biases, to see people without those filters clouding your judgment." She looked up, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I want to try. I want to learn, to be better. But I know it won't be easy." Mr. Thompson offered a small, encouraging smile. "No, it won't be. But you have my support, and I'll be here to help guide you through this process." She felt a wave of relief wash over her, though the weight of her actions still pressed heavily on her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That means a lot." He nodded, his expression growing serious again. "And there's one more thing, Ms. White. I think it's important that you apologize to Katie directly, if she's willing to hear it. She deserves to hear that you're genuinely sorry for what happened." Ms. White's face fell slightly, the thought of facing Katie filling her with both dread and resolve. I understand. I'd like to apologize to her if she'll let me." Mr. Thompson gave her a thoughtful nod. "Good. It may not fix everything, but it's a start." As Ms. White left Mr. Thompson's office, she felt a strange mixture of apprehension and relief. The path ahead was daunting, but for the first time, she felt as though she had a direction. A chance to make amends and, perhaps, become the person she had always thought she was. Later, as she stood by the display cases, carefully rearranging a set of necklaces, Claire approached, her expression cautious but kind. "Ms. White." Claire's voice was gentle, but her eyes held a glimmer of encouragement. How did it go with Mr. Thompson?" Ms. White looked up, her face a mixture of uncertainty and hope. He wants me to make things right. He thinks I should apologize to Katie directly." Claire nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I think that's a good idea. Katie deserves to hear that you're sorry," Ms. White sighed, glancing down at the jewelry case. "It's just harder than I thought it would be. I thought I was doing my job, protecting the store. But now, I realize I was just seeing things all wrong." Claire placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to admit that, Ms. White. We all have things we need to work on. But what matters is that you're willing to change." Ms. White looked at her, a faint smile of gratitude crossing her lips. "Thank you, Claire. I appreciate you saying that." Just then, Mark joined them, his usual calm demeanor softened by a look of quiet support. "Ms. White, if you need any help with anything, really, I think we're all here for you. This is a tough lesson, but you don't have to go through it alone." Ms. White's eyes softened as she looked between Claire and Mark, their kindness touching her in a way she hadn't expected. "Thank you, both of you. I know I haven't made it easy, but I'm going to try. I'm going to do better." Mark gave her an encouraging nod. "That's all anyone can ask, Ms. White. Just keep moving forward." As the store began to close for the evening, Ms. White felt a quiet determination settle within her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple, but with the support of her colleagues and the guidance from Mr. Thompson, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could earn back the trust she had lost. The next morning, Ms. White arrived at the store feeling a strange mix of determination and dread. She had barely slept, her thoughts circling around the words she needed to say. Mr. Thompson had arranged a meeting with Sheriff Johnson and Katie, who had agreed to come by before the store opened. Ms. White knew this was her opportunity to make things right, but the thought of facing them, especially Katie, filled her with apprehension. She stood near the entrance, anxiously wringing her hands as she waited. The store was empty, with only the soft hum of the air conditioning breaking the silence. Finally, she saw Mr. Thompson approach, followed closely by Sheriff Johnson and Katie. The sheriff's face was serious, his eyes watchful, while Katie walked slightly behind him, her gaze uncertain but curious. As they stepped inside, Ms. White felt her heart tighten. She took a deep breath, stepping forward slowly, her eyes locking onto Katie's. For a moment, she could see the hurt and confusion still lingering in the girl's expression, and it struck her deeply. Mr. Thompson gave her a gentle nod, urging her to begin. Ms. White cleared her throat, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Katie, Sheriff Johnson, thank you for coming. I know that what I did was wrong, and I can't begin to express how sorry I am." Katie's gaze flickered to her father, as if seeking reassurance, before she looked back at Ms. White, her young face cautious but open. Sheriff Johnson remained silent, his expression unreadable as he observed Ms. White carefully. Ms. White continued, her voice faltering slightly. "Katie, I judged you unfairly. I made assumptions without even knowing you, and I let my own fears cloud my judgment. I'm deeply sorry for the hurt I caused you." Katie's brows furrowed as she listened, her gaze thoughtful. She shifted slightly, as if processing Ms. White's words. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Why did you think I was doing something wrong?" Ms. White hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. I don't know, Katie. I think I was so focused on trying to keep the store safe that I stopped seeing people as individuals. I just saw a potential problem instead of a person." Katie tilted her head, her expression a mixture of curiosity and sadness. "So, you thought I was a problem, just because of how I looked?" The words struck Ms. White like a physical blow, and she felt her throat tighten. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm ashamed to say that's true, and it was wrong. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, just like anyone else." Sheriff Johnson cleared his throat, his gaze stern as he spoke. "Ms. White, it's one thing to apologize, but Katie's question goes deeper. She deserves to understand why she was treated that way, and frankly, so do I." Ms. White looked down, feeling the weight of their combined scrutiny. "Sheriff Johnson, you're right. I think I need to examine the biases I've held onto for too long. Working in a store like this, I became suspicious of anyone who didn't seem like our typical customer. But that's not an excuse. I realize now how damaging that attitude can be. Katie looked at her father, then back at Ms. White, her expression softening just a little. You hurt my feelings, she said quietly, her voice filled with honesty. But I guess everyone makes mistakes. Ms. White's eyes shimmered with tears as she listened, her heart aching at the simplicity of Katie's words. Thank you, Katie. I don't deserve your kindness, but I promise I'll work hard to be better. Not just for you, but for everyone who walks into this store. Sheriff Johnson remained silent for a moment, studying her face as if weighing her sincerity. Finally, he gave a slow nod. Ms. White, I appreciate that you're taking responsibility, but as Katie said, actions speak louder than words. I expect to see real change. Ms. White nodded, her resolve hardening. You have my word, Sheriff. I'm committed to making this right, and to proving that I can be trusted. Katie looked up at her father, a small smile breaking across her face. I think she means it, Dad. Sheriff Johnson's expression softened slightly as he looked down at his daughter, pride evident in his gaze. Katie, you're a wise young lady. I trust your judgment. Ms. White felt a wave of relief wash over her, though she knew that this was only the beginning. Thank you, Sheriff. And Katie, thank you for giving me a chance to make things right. Katie gave her a small, hesitant smile. Just don't do it again, okay? Ms. White let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, nodding fervently. I won't. I promise. As they left, Ms. White felt a sense of closure and clarity that had eluded her since the incident. She knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt a genuine hope that she could change, that she could become the person she wanted to be, someone who saw others without judgment, without prejudice. The morning sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, casting warm patches of light across the jewelry displays. Ms. White stood by one of the cases, adjusting a set of earrings with practiced hands. But this time, her movements were slower, more thoughtful. The weight of her recent experiences had made her see things differently, and she felt the importance of each interaction, each small gesture. Claire entered the store, noticing Ms. White's focused expression as she arranged the jewelry. She walked over, curiosity evident on her face. Ms. White, Claire began, her tone gentle. How are you feeling today? Ms. White looked up, a faint, thoughtful smile crossing her lips. I feel like I've got a lot to prove to everyone, including myself. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Claire's. I know I made mistakes, and I know words alone don't change anything. But I'm here to try, really try, to make things right. Claire's expression softened. That's good to hear, Ms. White. We all noticed how serious you were yesterday with Katie. I think people will appreciate your efforts, even if it takes time. Ms. White nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Thank you, Claire. I won't expect everyone to trust me right away, but I hope that, in time, they'll see I'm genuine. As she turned back to her work, the bell above the door chimed, signaling a new customer. A young woman entered, holding the hand of a little boy who looked no older than 6. He gazed around the store with wide, curious eyes, clearly fascinated by the sparkling displays. Ms. White's heart clenched slightly, reminded of her interaction with Katie. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and approached the young woman with a warm smile. Good morning. Is there anything I can help you find today? The woman smiled back, nodding. Yes, actually, my son here wanted to pick out something special for his grandmother. It's her birthday soon, and he's been saving up his allowance to buy her a little gift. Ms. White's smile deepened as she looked down at the boy, who was gazing up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. Well, aren't you a thoughtful young man? She said warmly. We have some lovely options that might be just perfect for your grandmother. The boy grinned shyly, and Ms. White led them to a display case filled with delicate bracelets and pendants. She knelt down to the boy's eye level, pointing out each piece with gentle care. These are some of our most popular items. Do you see anything you think she'd like? The boy examined the jewelry carefully, his small face serious as he studied each item. Maybe this one? He asked, pointing to a bracelet with a tiny heart charm. Ms. White's heart warmed at his enthusiasm. That's a lovely choice. I think she'll adore it. The young woman smiled gratefully at Ms. White. "Thank you for helping him. It means a lot." As she watched the boy proudly hold his chosen gift, Ms. White felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. She realized that every customer, no matter their age, had their own story, their own reasons for being here. And she was finally beginning to understand what it meant to respect and appreciate each one. Just as she finished ringing up the purchase, Mark walked over, having observed the interaction from a distance. "Ms. White," he said quietly, a hint of approval in his voice, "I can see you're really trying." "It's nice to see." Ms. White looked at him, surprised by the compliment, but she nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mark. I'm just taking it one step at a time." Mark gave her a nod, a small smile softening his usually serious expression. One step at a time sounds like the right approach. A few hours later, the store was bustling with activity. Ms. White found herself moving between customers, helping with purchases, and answering questions, each interaction a test of her commitment to change. As she assisted an elderly man who was selecting a necklace for his wife, she noticed a group of teenagers entering the store, laughing and talking loudly among themselves. Ms. White felt her chest tighten with an old, familiar tension. In the past, she might have watched them closely, suspecting trouble, but she took a deep breath, reminding herself of her promise to see people differently, to approach each person with an open mind. As the teenagers wandered through the store, she forced herself to relax, offering them a polite smile when they passed by her. One of the girls noticed a necklace and glanced at Ms. White hesitantly. "Excuse me," the girl began, her tone cautious. "Is it okay if we look at this necklace here?" Ms. White nodded, her smile gentle. "Of course. That's what we're here for. Take your time, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to help." The girl's face lit up with surprise, and she exchanged a glance with her friends, clearly relieved. They continued to browse, and Ms. White couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. She had chosen to treat them with respect, and in return, they had shown her the same. As the day drew to a close, Claire approached Ms. White again, her eyes shining with pride. "Ms. White, I just wanted to say, it's been really nice seeing you today. You've been so kind and patient with everyone. I think you're really making a difference." Ms. White felt a wave of gratitude and relief wash over her. "Thank you, Claire. I'm trying to remember that every person who walks in here deserves to be treated with kindness. It's harder than I expected, but it's worth it." Claire gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "You're doing great. Just keep going. You'll get there." As Ms. White looked around the now empty store, she realized that her journey was just beginning. Each day would bring new challenges, new chances to prove herself, to undo the mistakes she had made. But for the first time, she felt ready. She knew she still had a lot to learn, but with each small act of kindness, she was slowly finding her way back, not just to the respect of her colleagues and customers, but to a sense of peace within herself. The following afternoon, Ms. White moved around the store with a quiet sense of purpose. She adjusted the displays, greeting each customer with a warm smile, her tone softer and more genuine than it had ever been. Every interaction felt significant, a small reminder of the journey she had chosen to embark on. Claire watched from across the store, noting Ms. White's newfound approach with a mixture of pride and curiosity. It was clear that Ms. White was working hard to transform not only her attitude, but her very understanding of what it meant to serve others. As she finished assisting an elderly couple choosing an anniversary gift, the store door opened, and a young man entered. He wore a worn jacket and had a slightly disheveled appearance, his hands tucked into his pockets. His gaze wandered over the jewelry cases with an intensity that made a few of the other employees glance over, uncertain. Ms. White felt the familiar tightening in her chest, an instinctive reaction she was learning to control. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the commitment she had made. This young man, like every other customer, deserved respect and kindness. She stepped forward with a calm smile, her voice steady. "Good afternoon. Can I help you find something?" The young man looked at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He hesitated, as though unsure how to respond, before nodding slowly. "Yeah, I wanted to look at something for my mom's birthday," he said, his tone quiet but sincere. "I don't have a lot, but I wanted to get her something nice. Ms. White's heart softened, and she felt a rush of compassion. That's a lovely thought, she replied gently. Let's see if we can find something that would make her day special. She led him over to a display of modest yet elegant pieces, each one carefully chosen for its simplicity and beauty. She pointed out a small pendant with a delicate pearl. This one has been very popular. It's simple but timeless. The young man looked at the pendant, his fingers tapping nervously against his jacket. It's beautiful, he murmured. I think she'd really like it. Ms. White watched him, sensing his hesitation. You know, she said softly, the thought you're putting into this is what makes it truly special. I'm sure your mom will see that and appreciate it. He smiled slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was worried I'd be judged here. The words struck Ms. White, a reminder of her past behaviors, and she felt a pang of regret. She met his gaze, her voice filled with sincerity. We all deserve to be treated with respect, no matter what. Thank you for trusting me to help you. He nodded, visibly moved by her kindness, and proceeded to make the purchase. As he left, he cast one last grateful glance in her direction, and Ms. White felt a profound sense of fulfillment. It was a small victory, but it felt like a step toward becoming the person she wanted to be. Claire approached her shortly after, a smile playing on her lips. Ms. White, that was really nice. I could see how much he appreciated it. Ms. White smiled back, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, Claire. I just realized that sometimes people come in here needing more than jewelry. Sometimes they need a little kindness. Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. And you gave him that. I think that's what's going to make a difference, Ms. White. Not just to him, but to all of us. Just then, the door chimed again, and two young women entered, both chatting animatedly. They wore vibrant outfits and had bright, colorful accessories that immediately caught Ms. White's eye. In the past, she might have dismissed them, assuming they weren't serious customers. But today, she felt a different approach was needed. She approached them with a friendly smile. Good afternoon, ladies. Is there something special you're looking for today? One of the women looked at her, surprised, and then broke into a broad grin. Actually, yes. My best friend here just got promoted, and we're celebrating. We wanted to look at some rings. Ms. White's smile deepened, and she nodded enthusiastically. Congratulations. That's a wonderful reason to celebrate. We have a beautiful selection of rings that might be perfect for marking this occasion. She led them to a display of rings, watching as they admired each piece, laughing and talking excitedly. The ease with which they shared their joy brought a warmth to Ms. White's heart, and she found herself enjoying their company, genuinely happy for their celebration. One of the women, noticing Ms. White's attentiveness, leaned in and said, I have to say, it's so nice to feel welcome here. I've been in places where I felt, judged. Ms. White felt a lump form in her throat, understanding the sentiment all too well. Everyone deserves to feel welcome, she replied softly. Thank you for giving us the chance to help you celebrate. The women exchanged a glance, clearly touched by her sincerity. They selected a delicate ring, thanking Ms. White warmly before leaving the store with beaming smiles. As the afternoon wore on, Ms. White encountered customers of all backgrounds, each with a unique story, a different reason for being there. With each interaction, she felt herself growing, the barriers of judgment and bias dissolving as she focused on the people in front of her rather than her assumptions about them. By the time the store was closing, she felt an exhaustion that was both physical and emotional. But it was a good kind of exhaustion, a sense of having worked for something meaningful. As she began to close up, Mr. Thompson approached her, his expression contemplative. Ms. White, I wanted to speak with you about today. She turned to him, a flicker of worry crossing her face. Yes, Mr. Thompson? He paused, his gaze assessing but kind. I've watched you closely these past few days. I can see that you're genuinely trying, and I want you to know that it hasn't gone unnoticed. Ms. White felt a surge of relief, her shoulders relaxing as she listened. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I know I still have a lot to prove, but I'm committed to making things right. Mr. Thompson nodded, his voice warm but firm. And you're doing just that. I believe this experience has taught you something valuable. Keep this up, and I think you'll find that the respect you're earning is well-deserved." She looked down, a small, humbled smile on her lips. "I will, Mr. Thompson. I don't ever want to go back to the way I was." As she finished closing up the store, she felt a quiet sense of pride, a knowledge that she was not only changing her actions but transforming herself in a way she hadn't believed possible. She knew the journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt confident that she could walk this path, step by step. The store buzzed with the usual weekday flow, and Ms. White moved from one customer to the next, each interaction a new opportunity to test her resolve. Her heart still skipped a beat every time she noticed someone watching her, wondering if they were silently judging her or if they recognized her from the incident with Katie. She felt as if she was constantly walking a tightrope, but every friendly smile, every sincere thank you from a customer reassured her that she was making progress. In the middle of the afternoon, as she was showing a set of earrings to a mother and her teenage daughter, the door chimed again, and a man in his late 40s stepped inside. He had a sharp gaze and an air of confidence, the kind of person who noticed everything around him with an almost intimidating awareness. As he scanned the store, his eyes settled on Ms. White, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. He approached slowly, and Ms. White could feel the intensity of his gaze even before he reached her. She finished helping the mother and daughter, then turned to him with a polite smile, her heart pounding. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The man didn't return her smile. Instead, he crossed his arms, studying her for a long moment. "You're Ms. White, aren't you? The one who had that incident with the sheriff's daughter?" Ms. White felt her stomach drop, her cheeks flushing. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Yes, that's me," she replied quietly. "I'm Ms. White." He raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of skepticism and judgment. "I remember reading about it. I was appalled, to be honest. I came here today because I wanted to see for myself what kind of person would treat a child that way." Ms. White felt the weight of his words like a physical blow, but she held her ground, nodding slowly. "I understand, sir. I was wrong, and I deeply regret what I did. I've spent every day since trying to make amends, to be a better person." The man narrowed his eyes, unconvinced. "People like you don't change overnight, Ms. White. Apologies are easy. Real change? That's harder." Ms. White felt Claire's presence nearby, her supportive gaze bolstering her resolve. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "You're right, sir. Real change isn't easy, and I don't expect anyone to take my word for it. But I'm committed to proving that I've learned from my mistakes." He scoffed slightly, looking around the store. "So you've been nicer to customers for a week or two. And what happens next month? Or the month after that? People can pretend for a while, but they always go back to their old ways." Ms. White clenched her hands, feeling a surge of frustration and sadness. But instead of defending herself, she chose a different approach, one she'd learned from her conversations with Claire and Mr. Thompson. "I can't change how you see me, sir," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I can keep trying every single day to be someone worthy of respect. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I know I still have a lot to prove. But I won't let one mistake define who I am." The man looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction, though skepticism still lingered in his eyes. "And how do I know this isn't just a performance?" Ms. White gave him a small, sincere smile. "You don't, and maybe nothing I say will convince you, but I believe that actions speak louder than words. All I can do is continue treating everyone with the kindness and respect they deserve." The man was silent for a moment, watching her intently. Finally, he let out a small sigh. "I suppose we'll see, won't we?" She nodded, relief and humility mingling in her expression. "Yes, we will." He held her gaze a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning and leaving the store. Ms. White let out a slow breath, feeling the tension release from her shoulders as she watched him go. Claire walked over, a look of pride in her eyes. "Ms. White, that was really brave of you. I know that couldn't have been easy." Ms. White managed a small smile, her voice thick with emotion. "It wasn't, but it was necessary. I know I'll face people who won't believe I've changed, and that's okay. I don't expect anyone to forget what happened." Claire nodded thoughtfully, her voice soft. "It takes strength to own up to a mistake, but even more to keep working on yourself, knowing that not everyone will give you a second chance." Ms. White looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blouse. I want to keep doing better. And maybe one day, people will see that." For the rest of the afternoon, Ms. White continued to work, each customer interaction a small opportunity to prove to herself, and to anyone watching, that she was committed to this new path. There were moments when she caught herself second-guessing, wondering if anyone truly noticed the effort she was putting in. But every time a customer left with a genuine smile, or a colleague offered her a quiet nod of encouragement, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Toward the end of the day, as the store was winding down, Mr. Thompson approached her. His usual calm demeanor was laced with a subtle pride as he looked at her. "Ms. White, I saw what happened earlier with that gentleman. I know that couldn't have been easy." Ms. White looked up, a tired but content smile on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It was hard, but I think I needed to face that. I can't expect everyone to trust me right away." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "True, but you're doing the work, and that's what counts. Real change takes time and persistence, and you're showing both." She felt a warmth in her chest at his words, grateful for the support he had shown her throughout this journey. "Thank you for believing in me, Mr. Thompson. I don't know if I could have done this without your guidance." Mr. Thompson gave her a reassuring nod, his voice gentle. "I believed you were capable of change, Ms. White, and you're proving me right. Keep going. You're on the right path." As she finished her shift and locked up the store for the night, Ms. White felt a profound sense of peace. She knew the journey ahead would continue to test her resolve, and that there would always be people who doubted her intentions. But she also knew that with each new day, she had the chance to prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable of becoming a better person. For the first time, she walked away from the store with her head held high, knowing that the real challenge was not about proving herself to others, but about building a version of herself that she could truly be proud of. The store was relatively quiet that afternoon, a soft, calm lull that allowed Ms. White to catch her breath between assisting customers. She was organizing a display of gemstone rings when the door swung open and an elderly man stepped inside. His cane tapped loudly on the tiled floor as he made his way in, his face set in a deep frown, eyes scanning the store with visible discontent. Ms. White glanced over, noticing his stiff posture and furrowed brow. He muttered under his breath as he looked around, clearly unimpressed. She took a deep breath, preparing herself to meet his gaze, and approached with a polite smile. "Good afternoon, sir," she greeted warmly. "Is there something I can help you find today?" The man narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing her for a moment before answering. "I'm looking for a bracelet. A good one. Not any of this overpriced junk I keep seeing in stores these days." Ms. White felt the sting of his words, but kept her smile steady. "We have a lovely selection of bracelets here. I'd be happy to show you some options that might suit your taste." The man huffed, shaking his head as he followed her to the display. "We'll see. Don't waste my time with anything too flashy. I want something classy, understated. These other stores keep trying to sell me things that look like they're meant for teenagers." Ms. White nodded, her voice calm and patient. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure to show you pieces that are elegant and timeless." She carefully selected a few bracelets, placing them on a black velvet tray for him to examine. The man leaned over, squinting at each piece, his frown deepening as he inspected them. "This one's too shiny," he muttered, pushing one of the bracelets aside with a dismissive wave. "And this one, it's too thin. Feels like it'd break just by looking at it." Ms. White nodded, listening carefully to each critique without allowing herself to feel frustrated. "I understand, sir. Let me show you a few more options that might be closer to what you're looking for." Claire, who had been watching from a distance, caught Ms. White's eye and gave her a sympathetic smile. Ms. White returned the smile briefly, finding a small reassurance in her colleague's silent support. She selected another bracelet, a simple silver band with a small, tasteful sapphire embedded in the center. "How about this one, sir? It's crafted from sterling silver, very durable, and the design is quite classic. The man examined it, his expression softening slightly. Maybe. It doesn't look too bad. He held it up to the light, turning it over as though evaluating every detail. How much is this one? Ms. White informed him of the price, and he let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Prices these days. Everything's a rip-off. He handed the bracelet back to her, his frown returning. Is this really the best you have? I thought this was supposed to be a reputable store. Ms. White's patience was tested, but she kept her tone even. I understand, sir. Prices have gone up recently, but we do take pride in the quality of our products. Perhaps I can show you something else within a similar style, but at a different price point. The man sighed, visibly frustrated, but he nodded reluctantly. Fine, but make it quick. I don't have all day. Ms. White nodded, carefully selecting another piece. This time a thicker bracelet with a more traditional design. She presented it to him with a quiet confidence, hoping it might appeal to his taste. The man studied the bracelet for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. This one's not bad, but are you sure it'll hold up? I don't want to be back here in a month demanding a refund. Ms. White met his gaze, her tone reassuring. This piece is made to last, sir. We offer a warranty on all of our jewelry, and if there's ever an issue, we'll be happy to assist you. He grunted, seemingly satisfied but unwilling to admit it. Fine, I'll take it, he muttered, digging into his pocket for his wallet. As he handed her the payment, he glanced up, his expression softening ever so slightly. You've been patient, he admitted gruffly. Most people these days don't seem to have the time or the courtesy. Ms. White felt a flicker of surprise at the acknowledgement, and she gave him a small, sincere smile. Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure to help. He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at her. You're a rare one. Don't lose that. Ms. White felt her heart warm at his words, the genuine sentiment surprising her after the difficult interaction. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. As the elderly man left, Claire approached Ms. White, her eyes shining with pride. That was amazing, Ms. White. I don't think I could have kept my patience as well as you did. Ms. White let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Honestly, I wasn't sure I could either. But I think I'm finally understanding what it means to really listen to people. Everyone has their own struggles, and sometimes all they need is a little kindness. Claire nodded thoughtfully, a smile spreading across her face. I can see the change in you, Ms. White, and I think our customers are starting to see it too. Ms. White felt a swell of gratitude, a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. She realized that her interactions with each customer were becoming a way to practice patience, humility, and empathy. Every conversation, every challenge, was an opportunity to grow. As the day drew to a close, Mr. Thompson gathered the team for a quick meeting. He stood at the front of the store, his expression calm but proud as he addressed them. I want to acknowledge the hard work each of you has been putting in, he began, his gaze sweeping over the team before landing on Ms. White. Especially you, Ms. White. I've seen a remarkable transformation in the way you approach our customers, and I want you to know that it hasn't gone unnoticed. Ms. White felt a blush creep into her cheeks, and she nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It means a lot to hear that. He smiled, a look of genuine pride in his eyes. Keep up the good work. This store is better because of each one of you, and together, we're building an environment where everyone feels respected and valued. As the team dispersed, Claire lingered beside Ms. White, her voice soft. You know, I think Mr. Thompson's right. This place feels different now, and I think a lot of that is thanks to you. Ms. White looked down, a humble smile on her face. I'm just trying to make up for my mistakes, one day at a time. Claire nodded, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. And you're doing an incredible job. We're all proud of you. As Ms. White locked up the store for the evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Each day presented new challenges, new opportunities to test her commitment to change. She knew there would be moments of doubt and frustration, but she also knew that she was stronger than she had ever realized. For the first time, she felt at peace, knowing that her past mistakes did not define her. It was her actions, her choices each day, that truly mattered. And with each step, She was becoming the person she had always wanted to be. The early morning was quiet, the store just beginning to fill with the soft hum of activity as customers trickled in. Ms. White had been organizing a new display near the entrance when the doors swung open, and she glanced up, expecting another early bird shopper. Instead, she found herself face to face with a familiar figure. Anne, her friend of many years, who wore a skeptical smile as she looked around the store. "Anne," Ms. White greeted her, a mixture of surprise and warmth in her voice. She hadn't seen Anne in weeks, not since she'd begun her journey of change. "It's been a while. What brings you here?" And tilted her head, her eyes glinting with a teasing yet suspicious expression. "Oh, I thought I'd stop by and see the new and improved Ms. White that everyone's been talking about. Word travels fast, you know." Ms. White's smile faltered slightly, catching the undertone in her friend's voice. I've been working hard to improve, and I've made some mistakes, and I'm trying to make things right," and crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Really? You, of all people, changing? That's hard to believe. I mean, you were always the one who had a sharp eye for trouble. We both did." Ms. White felt a pang of discomfort at Anne's words, memories flashing through her mind of the many times they had exchanged looks of disapproval at certain customers, their silent judgments building a bond between them. She took a steadying breath, choosing her words carefully. "And I realize now that a lot of those sharp eyes were based on assumptions, on unfair judgments. I don't want to be that person anymore," and scoffed, her tone laced with disbelief. "Come on, White. People don't just change overnight. This isn't like you. You were always proud of being cautious, of not letting anyone slip by. Now, all of a sudden, you're telling me you're some kind of saint." Ms. White shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "No, not a saint. I still have a lot to work on, but I've seen the impact of my actions, and I hurt people because of my assumptions, people who deserved respect, not judgment," and frowned, her brows knitting together as she stared at Ms. White. "This doesn't make sense to me. Why would you want to be like everyone else, always giving people the benefit of the doubt? That's how you get taken advantage of." Ms. White met her friend's gaze, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Maybe I don't mind taking that risk if it means treating people with the kindness they deserve. It's not about letting people walk all over me. It's about seeing them as they are, not as I assume them to be." Anne's eyes narrowed, her disbelief shifting to something closer to anger. "So you're saying everything we used to do, everything we thought, that was wrong? That I'm wrong for not buying into this new you?" Ms. White felt the tension rise, the quiet intensity of Anne's gaze pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the path she'd chosen. "I'm saying that I was wrong, Anne, and if I've learned anything from all this, it's that judging people based on appearances hurts everyone involved. You, me, the people we judge. It creates a barrier between us and them," and crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "And you think they care? You think those people see us any differently just because you've had a change of heart?" Ms. White hesitated, feeling the sting of her friend's words. She knew that not everyone would understand her change, and maybe some wouldn't care. But she also knew that this was about more than just how others saw her. "It's not about how they see me, Anne. It's about how I see myself," Ms. White said quietly. "I was ashamed of who I was. And this change, it's the only way I can feel like I'm becoming someone I can respect." Anne's mouth tightened, her disbelief softening into something closer to confusion. "I don't know, White. This doesn't feel like you. We've always been on the same page. And now, it's like you're a different person." Ms. White looked down, the weight of her friend's words settling heavily on her. "Maybe I am a different person, but that doesn't mean I don't care about our friendship. It just means I've chosen a new direction." There was a pause, a quiet moment where the two women looked at each other, both feeling the distance that had formed between them. Ms. White wanted desperately for and to understand, to see the person she was trying to become. But she could also sense her friend's resistance, the unwillingness to let go of the past they'd shared. Anne's gaze softened just a little, though her expression remained guarded. "I'm not sure I can see this change, White. Maybe you're doing this because you have to, but deep down, I don't know if you can really keep it up." Ms. White felt her throat tighten, but she gave a small, resolute nod. I understand, Anne. I know it might be hard to believe, but I promise you, this isn't temporary. I've hurt people, and I can't go back to who I was. I won't. And sighed, her arms dropping to her sides. Well, I guess we'll see, won't we? Ms. White offered a sad smile, understanding the skepticism in her friend's voice. Yes, we will. But I hope that someday you'll see that I mean this. And I hope that you'll support me, even if you don't fully understand. And looked away, her expression conflicted. I don't know, White. This feels strange. Like I'm losing the friend I used to know. Ms. White felt a pang of sadness at the words, but she also felt a new resolve. Maybe you're not losing a friend, and maybe you're gaining a better one. They stood there in silence, the unspoken tension between them thick and heavy. Finally, Anne let out a sigh and gave a reluctant nod. Fine, I'll be around. Just don't expect me to suddenly see things your way. Ms. White nodded, understanding the compromise. I won't, Anne, but thank you for being here. I know it's not easy to watch someone change, and gave a half-hearted shrug, her gaze distant. Well, we'll see how long it lasts. With that, she turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Ms. White standing alone, the weight of the conversation settling over her like a thick fog. She knew that not everyone would understand, that some people, even close friends, might never fully accept her change. But as painful as it was, she also knew that this was part of her journey, a path she had to walk even if others chose not to join her. As she watched and leave, Claire approached, her face etched with quiet understanding. Are you okay, Ms. White? Ms. White gave a small, sad smile, nodding slowly. Yes, Claire, I think I am. Not everyone's going to believe in me or understand why I've changed. But that's okay. I know what I'm doing, and that's what matters. Claire placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. And for what it's worth, I believe in you. We all do. You're stronger than you think. Ms. White felt a warmth spread through her chest at Claire's words, the support of her colleagues a balm to the doubts that lingered from her conversation with Anne. Thank you, Claire. That means more than I can say. As she returned to her work, Ms. White felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew her journey would be filled with challenges, with people who doubted her, and perhaps even friendships that would falter along the way. But she also knew that she was building a new foundation for herself, one based on empathy, respect, and the courage to face her mistakes. For the first time, she felt a deep inner peace, a knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be, walking a path she had chosen for herself, regardless of who believed in her or not. It was a regular weekday afternoon when the door chime echoed through the store, signaling another customer. Ms. White was adjusting a display near the entrance, and as she looked up, her heart skipped a beat. Walking through the door, hand in hand, were Sheriff Johnson and Katie, both casting a cautious glance around the store. Ms. White felt a rush of emotions, surprise, a touch of anxiety, and, above all, a determination to prove that her transformation was real. She took a steadying breath, mentally preparing herself. She knew that this was a crucial moment, not only for Katie and Sheriff Johnson, but also for herself. Good afternoon, Sheriff Johnson. Katie, she greeted, her voice warm but respectful. It's nice to see you both again. Sheriff Johnson's gaze was steady, assessing her with a slight nod. Ms. White, we thought we'd stop by. Katie wanted to look around a bit. She's still fond of those gemstone displays. Katie, who was glancing around shyly, gave Ms. White a small, tentative smile. Hi, Ms. White. Ms. White felt her heart warm at the sight of Katie's smile. Hi, Katie. You're just in time. We've got a few new gemstone pieces that I think you might like. Would you like to take a look? Katie's eyes lit up, and she looked up at her father, silently asking for his permission. Sheriff Johnson gave her a gentle nod, and she stepped forward, her curiosity overriding her initial shyness. Ms. White led them to a nearby display case filled with sparkling gemstones, each one catching the light in vivid colors. She carefully unlocked the case, lifting out a small velvet tray with a variety of pieces, a sapphire pendant, a ruby bracelet, and a delicate amethyst ring that seemed to capture Katie's attention. Katie leaned in, her face glowing with fascination. They're so pretty, she murmured, reaching out to gently touch the amethyst ring. Ms. White watched her, a soft smile on her face. The amethyst is one of my favorites too, Katie. It's known as the Stone of Peace. A lot of people say it brings calm and clarity. Katie looked up, her eyes wide with interest. Really? I think I could use some calm sometimes. Sheriff Johnson chuckled softly, his gaze softening as he watched his daughter. We all could, Katie. Ms. White felt a surge of gratitude for this moment, the opportunity to connect with Katie in a way she hadn't before. She looked at Sheriff Johnson, her expression sincere. I want to thank you both for giving me this chance. I know I still have a lot to prove, but it means a lot that you're here. Sheriff Johnson's face was thoughtful, his eyes studying her carefully. I have to admit, Ms. White, I didn't expect to be back here, but I've heard from a few people that you've been making changes. Real ones. Ms. White nodded, her voice steady. I have. I realized that the way I treated people, the way I treated Katie, it was wrong. And I'm working hard every day to make sure that never happens again. Katie glanced up at her father, then back at Ms. White. I can tell you're different. You're kinder. Ms. White's heart swelled at Katie's words, a wave of relief and happiness washing over her. Thank you, Katie. That means so much to me. Sheriff Johnson nodded, acknowledging her words. It takes courage to change, Ms. White. Most people just say they'll do better, but from what I've seen and heard, you're showing it through your actions. Just then, another customer entered the store, a young mother with a toddler clinging to her leg. The little boy, barely old enough to walk steadily, was staring up at the sparkling displays with wide eyes, clearly fascinated. Ms. White saw the woman struggling slightly with her son, who kept pulling toward the jewelry cases. Ms. White glanced at Sheriff Johnson, then at Katie, giving them a small, understanding smile. If you'll excuse me for a moment, I'll be right back. Sheriff Johnson nodded, his expression curious as he watched her approach the young mother. Good afternoon. Ms. White greeted warmly. Would you like a hand? I could keep an eye on him if you'd like to look around. The mother looked relieved, a grateful smile lighting up her tired face. Oh, thank you so much. He's a handful, and I'd love to look at some pieces without him trying to grab everything. Ms. White chuckled softly, bending down to the toddler's level. Hi there, little one. Do you like the shiny stones? The boy looked at her, his eyes wide, and nodded eagerly. Ms. White gently led him to a display case filled with simple, colorful beads, keeping him entertained while his mother browsed the jewelry. She talked to him in a gentle, playful voice, pointing out different colors and shapes, his giggles filling the store. From across the room, Sheriff Johnson and Katie watched, their expressions softening as they saw Ms. White's kindness in action. It wasn't forced or rehearsed. It was genuine, the warmth of someone who cared about the people she was helping. After a few minutes, the mother returned, having picked out a bracelet. Thank you so much, Ms. White. You're wonderful with kids. Ms. White smiled, handing the boy back to his mother. It was my pleasure. He's a sweet boy. As they left, Ms. White turned back to Sheriff Johnson and Katie, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Thank you for waiting. Kids have a way of brightening the store. Katie grinned, nodding in agreement. He was cute. Sheriff Johnson gave her a long, thoughtful look. Ms. White, I think we've seen all we need to. I came here to see if the changes people mentioned were real, and I have to say, I believe they are. Ms. White felt her throat tighten with emotion, his words filling her with a deep sense of gratitude. Thank you, Sheriff Johnson. That means everything to me. I'll keep doing my best. He nodded, his face softening into a rare smile. Katie and I are glad we came back. It's good to see that people can change, and that they want. Katie stepped forward, giving Ms. White a shy smile. Can I try on the amethyst ring? Just to see what it feels like. Ms. White's smile widened, and she carefully placed the ring on Katie's finger. It suits you, Katie. You look lovely. Katie gazed at the ring, her eyes shining with happiness. It's so pretty. I feel special. Sheriff Johnson chuckled, ruffling her hair. That's because you are, Katie. Ms. White watched them, a warm sense of contentment filling her heart. She knew that moments like these were rare, precious gifts, reminders of the impact kindness could have, not only on others but on herself. As Sheriff Johnson and Katie left, Katie turned and gave her a small wave. "Thank you, Ms. White." Ms. White waved back, her smile lingering long after they had disappeared through the door. She felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she was no longer defined by her past mistakes, but by the choices she made every day. And as she turned back to her work, she felt ready to continue down this path of empathy, respect, and, most importantly, genuine transformation. The late afternoon light cast a warm glow through the store's windows, filtering over the polished jewelry cases and filling the shop with a peaceful atmosphere. Ms. White was restocking a display of earrings, enjoying the calm after a bustling day, when the door flew open with a sharp jangle, startling her out of her concentration. A tall man in a crisp, dark suit strode in, his expression set in a scowl as he scanned the room with obvious displeasure. His gaze fell on Ms. White, and he narrowed his eyes, marching toward her with a purposeful, almost intimidating stride. She straightened, feeling a flicker of apprehension. Claire, who had been tidying a nearby display, looked up, a concerned expression flickering across her face as she noticed the tension in the man's posture. Mr. Thompson, too, glanced over from the far side of the store, his brow furrowing as he observed the man's demeanor. "Excuse me," the man said sharply, his voice clipped and demanding. "Is this how you run a jewelry store? I've been to high-end places across the country, and I've never seen such poor organization and lack of service." Ms. White took a steadying breath, meeting his intense gaze with as much calm as she could muster. "I'm very sorry if we've fallen short of your expectations, sir. How can I assist you today?" The man huffed, rolling his eyes as if her politeness was an inconvenience. "I'm here to buy a gift for my wife's birthday. I want something elegant, not cheap and tacky like half the things I see around here." Ms. White ignored the slight and nodded, her tone unwavering. "Of course, sir. We have a selection of fine pieces that may be just what you're looking for. If you'd like, I can show you our latest collection of diamond pendants." The man frowned, as though unimpressed. "Diamonds? You think my wife is that predictable? I want something unique, something that actually shows taste. Show me what you have that isn't basic." Ms. White felt a pang of frustration but remained composed, guiding him over to a different display case. She carefully pulled out a tray containing a few of their more exclusive pieces, including a custom-designed pendant with a rare sapphire centerpiece. "This piece," she said, presenting the pendant with a touch of pride, "features a sapphire from a small region in Sri Lanka. It's one of a kind, both in color and cut. The setting is handcrafted as well." The man picked it up, examining it with a critical eye before scoffing. "Is this really the best you have? Honestly, I expected better from a place that calls itself high-end. And why on earth is it so expensive? This doesn't look like it's worth half the price." Ms. White's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the display case, but she forced herself to maintain a calm, professional expression. "I understand, sir. High-quality gemstones and custom designs can be costly, but I assure you that each piece here has been carefully crafted with attention to detail and quality." The man sneered, shaking his head in disapproval. "Carefully crafted? I've seen more craftsmanship in cheap tourist trinkets." He put the pendant back with a dismissive flick of his wrist, his eyes narrowing as he looked back at her. "I don't think you have anything here that's good enough for my standards." Ms. White felt a ripple of tension in the room. She knew Claire and Mr. Thompson were both watching the exchange closely. The weight of their gazes reminded her that this was a moment to prove, not just to them but to herself, that she had indeed changed. She met the man's gaze, her voice gentle but firm. "I understand, sir. I apologize if our collection isn't meeting your expectations. Perhaps if you could describe a little more about your wife's tastes, I could suggest something more specific." The man rolled his eyes again, crossing his arms. "She's sophisticated, obviously, not the kind of woman who'd settle for anything second-rate. So, forgive me if I'm a little disappointed that I haven't seen anything worthwhile here." Ms. White felt a flicker of irritation but pushed it down, determined to keep her composure. "I understand, sir. Let me check with our backroom inventory. We may have some additional pieces that aren't on display yet." She turned toward the back, catching Claire's encouraging nod as she passed. Mr. Thompson gave her a small, approving smile, his gaze reassuring. In the past, she would have struggled to contain her frustration, perhaps even retaliated with a sharp comment. But now, she felt a quiet determination to handle the situation with dignity, regardless of the customer's rudeness. When she returned, she carried another tray, this one containing a few pieces that were usually reserved for exclusive showings. The man's eyes lingered over them, though his expression remained skeptical. This piece, she explained, holding up a platinum bracelet adorned with tiny emeralds, is one of our most unique designs. Each emerald has been carefully selected for color consistency, and the setting is made to last a lifetime. He inspected it, his expression softening slightly, though he still seemed reluctant to show any approval. Well, this one is better, but I don't know if it's worth the price you're asking. This isn't a charity, you know. Ms. White nodded, her tone respectful. Of course, sir. We aim to provide pieces that hold their value over time. If you have any concerns, we can also discuss payment options or warranties that might make your purchase more comfortable. The man scoffed but seemed to relent. Fine, I'll take it. But I expect exceptional service if I'm paying this much. Ms. White managed a polite smile, nodding as she wrapped up the bracelet in their finest packaging, ensuring that each step of the process was handled with care. Thank you for your purchase, sir. We're honored that you chose this piece for such a special occasion. As she handed him the neatly wrapped box, the man looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gave a curt nod. You handled yourself well. Most people would have snapped by now. Maybe this place isn't as mediocre as I thought. Ms. White felt a subtle sense of victory at his words, as though she had passed a test she hadn't anticipated. Thank you, sir. We're here to serve, and I hope your wife enjoys the gift. With a final huff, the man turned and left, the door closing behind him with a soft jingle. Ms. White let out a quiet breath, feeling the tension ease from her shoulders as Claire and Mr. Thompson approached. Claire's face broke into a grin. Ms. White, that was incredible. I don't know how you kept your patience with him. Ms. White chuckled softly, shaking her head. Believe me, it wasn't easy. But I just kept thinking, this is who I want to be now. Someone who treats everyone with respect, no matter how they act. Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression filled with pride. You did exactly that, Ms. White. You showed true grace under pressure. It's moments like these that prove how far you've come. Ms. White felt a swell of warmth, a sense of accomplishment that filled her with pride. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And thank you, Claire. I couldn't have done it without all the support I've had here. As she looked around the store, a wave of peace settled over her. She knew that this wasn't just about surviving one difficult customer. It was about becoming someone she respected, someone who could look back on each day with a sense of purpose and integrity. In that quiet moment, she knew she was finally on the right path, ready to continue growing, learning, and serving others with empathy and grace. It was a quiet afternoon, the warm sunlight filtering through the glass storefront, casting a gentle glow across the jewelry displays. Ms. White was adjusting a row of necklaces, feeling the calm that had become a familiar companion in her new approach to each day. She had come to treasure these peaceful moments, where she could reflect on how far she had come. The soft chime of the door startled her, and she glanced up, expecting a new customer. To her surprise, standing in the entrance, looking a bit nervous but determined, was Katie. She held a small purse clutched tightly in her hands, and her eyes sparkled with both excitement and apprehension. Katie, Ms. White greeted, a warm smile spreading across her face. What a lovely surprise. Are you here with your dad? Katie shook her head, stepping further into the store with a shy but genuine smile. No, I came by myself. I wanted to talk to you, Ms. White. I need your help with something. Ms. White felt her heart swell with warmth, touched by the trust Katie was showing by coming to her alone. She walked around the counter, lowering herself to Katie's eye level, and softened her tone. Of course, Katie. Anything you need. What can I help you with? Katie looked down at her purse, taking a deep breath before meeting Ms. White's gaze. It's my dad's birthday next week, and I want to get him something really special. He does so much for me, and I thought maybe you could help me find something that he'd like." Ms. White's smile deepened, a sense of pride and joy filling her. "I'd be honored to help you find the perfect gift for him, Katie. I know how much he means to you." Katie nodded, her eyes serious as she spoke. He's the best dad in the world. He's always there for me, no matter what. I want to give him something that shows him how much I love him." Ms. White felt a lump form in her throat at the sincerity in Katie's voice. She placed a gentle hand on Katie's shoulder, her own voice thick with emotion. "I understand, Katie, and I know just the kind of pieces that might be perfect." She led Katie over to a display case filled with men's accessories, selecting a few items she thought might suit Sheriff Johnson's style, elegant but understated. She placed a silver cufflink set and a sleek leather bracelet on a velvet tray, arranging them with care. "This bracelet," Ms. White explained, holding it up for Katie to see, "is made from high-quality leather, and it's designed to be both stylish and durable. It's something he can wear every day, and every time he does, he'll remember how much you love him." Katie's eyes lit up as she touched the bracelet gently, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "I think he'd like that. He doesn't wear a lot of fancy stuff, but this feels like something he would wear." Ms. White smiled, nodding. "Exactly. It's simple, but meaningful. And if you'd like, we could even have it engraved with something special." Katie's face brightened at the suggestion, and she looked up with eager eyes. "Could we? Maybe something like, 'For the best dad in the world?'" Ms. White chuckled softly, feeling a pang of affection for Katie. "That sounds perfect, Katie. I'm sure he'll love it." Katie beamed, her nervousness melting away as she grew more comfortable. "Thank you, Ms. White. I was worried I wouldn't know what to get him, but this feels right." Ms. White's heart warmed at Katie's trust, and she placed the bracelet gently back on the tray. "It's a beautiful choice, Katie, and it's so thoughtful of you to come here by yourself and put so much care into finding the perfect gift. I know your dad will be so proud of you." Katie nodded, looking down at the bracelet with a soft smile. I want him to know that I'm proud of him too. He's always helping people, even when it's hard." Ms. White felt her chest tighten with emotion, deeply moved by Katie's words. She could see so much of Sheriff Johnson's kindness and strength reflected in his daughter, and she realized how special this moment was, not only for Katie but for herself as well. This was a chance to show Katie that she was worthy of her trust, that her own journey of change was real and meaningful. "Katie," Ms. White began softly, her voice filled with sincerity, "I want you to know that I'm honored you came to me for help today, and I'm really grateful for the chance to get to know you better." Katie looked up, a warm smile spreading across her face. "I'm glad I came too, Ms. White. You're different now, in a good way, and I'm happy about that." Ms. White felt her throat tighten, but she managed a soft laugh, blinking away the hint of tears. "Thank you, Katie. That means more than you know." They shared a quiet, understanding smile, a moment of connection that bridged the gap between their past and present. As Ms. White began processing the engraving request, she noticed Claire watching from across the room, her expression touched and proud. After arranging everything, Ms. White returned to Katie, who was carefully counting the money she brought with her, a mixture of crumpled bills and coins. Ms. White smiled, touched by the sight. "Don't worry, Katie," she said gently. "This one's on the house. Consider it a gift for you, for being such a thoughtful daughter." Katie's eyes widened in surprise, her mouth dropping open. But Ms. White, I want to pay for it. It's my gift for him." Ms. White knelt down, placing a hand over Katie's. "And you are paying for it, Katie, in the best way possible, with your heart. I want to be a part of this gift because it's important to you, and that makes it important to me too." Katie's face broke into a radiant smile, and she threw her arms around Ms. White in a spontaneous hug. "Thank you, Ms. White. You're the best." Ms. White hugged her back, her heart swelling with happiness. "Thank you, Katie. And you know what? I think you're the best too." As Katie left the store, clutching her carefully wrapped gift, Ms. White watched her go with a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. This was more than a simple transaction. It was a moment of true reconciliation, a bridge that brought her full circle in her journey. Claire approached, her eyes bright with admiration. "Ms. White, that was beautiful. You've come so far." Ms. White nodded, her heart brimming with gratitude. "I have, and it feels right, Claire. I feel like I've found my place again." As she returned to her work, Ms. White knew that this was the culmination of everything she had worked toward. The acceptance, the trust, and the forgiveness that Katie's visit represented. And with each step forward, she felt herself growing stronger, more compassionate, and more at peace with the person she had become. The following morning, the store was abuzz with activity as the staff gathered for a meeting. Mr. Thompson stood at the front of the room, his usual calm demeanor underscored by a hint of excitement. Ms. White took her seat near the middle, exchanging a curious glance with Claire, who sat beside her. "Thank you all for joining me this morning," Mr. Thompson began, his voice warm but authoritative. "I've been thinking a lot about how we can better connect with our community and build stronger relationships with our customers. And I think it's time for something a little different." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The team leaned forward in their seats, intrigued. "We're launching a new initiative," he continued, "a monthly jewelry appreciation day for our local community. It's an opportunity to bring people in, show them not just the beauty of our pieces, but the history, the craftsmanship, and the stories behind them. I want our customers to understand the value of what we do here, beyond just the price tags." Ms. White felt a spark of excitement mingled with a touch of nervousness. She'd always appreciated the finer details of the jewelry they sold, but sharing that knowledge with the community, it felt like a big responsibility. Mr. Thompson's gaze traveled around the room, pausing when it landed on Ms. White. "And I'd like Ms. White to lead the first session." A ripple of surprise spread through the room, and Ms. White felt her face flush. She hadn't expected this. She caught Claire's gaze, and Claire gave her a small, encouraging smile. "Mr. Thompson," Ms. White began, her voice a little shaky, I'd be honored. But are you sure? I mean, I'm still working on myself, on how I connect with our customers." Mr. Thompson nodded, his gaze steady and reassuring. "That's exactly why I chose you, Ms. White. Over the past few weeks, you've shown remarkable growth. I believe you're ready for this. In fact, I think you're the perfect person to show our customers what our store is truly about." Ms. White felt a wave of gratitude and pride wash over her. This was more than just an assignment. It was a validation of her efforts, a recognition that she had come a long way since that painful day with Katie. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she said softly. "I'll do my best." Mr. Thompson smiled, giving her a supportive nod. "I have no doubt you will." As the meeting continued, Mr. Thompson explained the plan for the event, outlining the various pieces he wanted Ms. White to highlight and the stories she could share about their origins and craftsmanship. Ms. White listened intently, taking mental notes, her excitement growing with each detail. After the meeting, Claire approached her, a wide smile on her face. "Ms. White, this is amazing. I'm so proud of you. You're going to be fantastic." Ms. White gave a shy laugh, her cheeks flushing. "Thank you, Claire. I won't lie, I'm a little nervous. I mean, leading a whole session like this, it's a lot." Claire squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "You've got this. You've been connecting with customers in a whole new way lately. This is just a chance to show even more people the person you've become." Ms. White felt her heart swell with gratitude. "Thank you, Claire. It means a lot to have your support." The day of the event arrived faster than Ms. White anticipated. The store was prepared with rows of chairs set up near the jewelry displays, and a small podium stood at the front, waiting for her. A display case nearby was filled with some of the store's most unique pieces: vintage brooches, rare gemstone rings, and an antique watch that had once belonged to a famous opera singer. Ms. White took a deep breath as she arranged the last of the pieces, her hands steady but her heart racing. The doors opened, and a small group of local customers began to filter in, chatting excitedly as they took their seats. She recognized some familiar faces, including Katie and Sheriff Johnson, who waved at her from the back row. She smiled back at them, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than just an event. It was a chance to show her community who she truly was now. Mr. Thompson gave her an encouraging nod from the side of the room as she stepped up to the podium, the quiet murmur of conversation fading as the audience turned their attention to her. Good morning, everyone, Ms. White began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to share with you some of the stories behind our jewelry, to show you the beauty and history that each piece holds. She paused, looking around the room, her gaze landing on Katie, whose smile gave her an extra boost of confidence. Jewelry is often seen as just an accessory, something pretty to wear. But every piece has a story, a journey from raw material to finished design, and it becomes part of our own story when we wear it. She picked up a delicate silver brooch adorned with a small sapphire. This brooch, for example, was crafted over 100 years ago by a family of jewelers in Italy. It's seen generations of wear, passing down through families and witnessing countless important moments. The audience listened intently, their expressions filled with curiosity and admiration. Ms. White continued, explaining the intricate details of the designs, the artistry behind each gemstone cut, and the significance of the materials chosen. Her nerves gradually faded, replaced by a sense of joy in sharing her knowledge. As she wrapped up the session, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had not only educated her audience but also connected with them on a personal level. She opened the floor for questions, and several hands shot up, eager to know more about the craftsmanship and history of specific pieces. One customer, a woman in her 60s, asked, "Ms. White, what made you so interested in jewelry? You seem to know so much, not just about the pieces themselves, but about the meaning behind them." Ms. White felt a lump in her throat, touched by the question. "Thank you for asking. I've always admired jewelry, but it was only recently that I realized how much more there is to it. These pieces tell stories, and over the past few weeks, I've come to understand that each of us has our own story to tell too. Jewelry, in a way, helps us express who we are and connect with others." The woman smiled, nodding thoughtfully. "That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that." As the event concluded, Ms. White received heartfelt compliments from several attendees, each of them expressing their appreciation for the insight she had provided. Sheriff Johnson and Katie approached her last, a proud smile on Sheriff Johnson's face. "Ms. White," he said, his voice filled with warmth, "I think I speak for everyone here when I say you did an incredible job. You've really come a long way." Katie nodded, her eyes shining. "Yeah, Ms. White, you were amazing. I could listen to you talk about jewelry all day." Ms. White laughed, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you both. That means the world to me." As they left, Mr. Thompson approached, his expression filled with pride. "Ms. White, you exceeded every expectation. You brought the community closer to us, and you reminded everyone, including myself, of the heart and soul behind our work." Ms. White felt a sense of peace settle over her journey of change now truly complete. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I couldn't have done any of this without the support of everyone here." With a renewed sense of purpose, Ms. White returned to her duties, feeling more connected to her team, her community, and herself than ever before. The following day, as Ms. White was reviewing the schedule for upcoming events at the store, Mr. Thompson approached her, a rare gleam of excitement in his eyes. He held a white envelope with elegant calligraphy scrawled across the front, and he handed it to her with a gentle smile. "Ms. White," he began, his tone warm, "I have something special for you. Open it." She looked down at the envelope, her curiosity piqued. Carefully, she slid her finger under the flap, pulling out a cream-colored invitation embellished with gold lettering. It read, "The Annual Jewelers Association Gala, an evening of elegance and excellence." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Thompson, this is an invitation to the gala?" He nodded, clearly pleased with her reaction. "Yes, I'd like you to attend this year's event as our representative. It's a gathering of jewelers and designers from across the region. It'll be an opportunity for us to showcase what we've accomplished and, of course, to network with some of the best minds in the industry." Ms. White felt a thrill of excitement, mixed with a twinge of nervousness. "Are you sure, Mr. Thompson? I mean, me at an event like this?" Mr. Thompson gave her a reassuring smile, his eyes filled with confidence. "Absolutely. You've earned this, Ms. White. The transformation you've undergone, the way you've reconnected with our customers and strengthened our team. It's exactly the kind of presence we need at an event like this." Ms. White's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. She had never imagined that her journey of growth and redemption would lead her to this moment. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I won't let you down." He nodded, his expression softening. "I know you won't." The night of the gala arrived, and Ms. White stood before her mirror, adjusting the simple yet elegant black dress she had chosen for the occasion. Her fingers brushed over a silver necklace, one of her favorite pieces, and she took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anticipation and calm settle within her. Arriving at the grand ballroom, she was immediately greeted by the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the room, illuminating the guests dressed in their finest attire. She could feel the energy of the room, a blend of excitement, camaraderie, and the elegance that only the world of fine jewelry could create. As she stepped further inside, a familiar face caught her eye. It was Mr. Randall, rival jeweler with whom she'd once shared a tense, competitive relationship. He looked her way, his expression unreadable. Ms. White felt a flicker of apprehension but squared her shoulders, reminding herself of the commitment she had made to her growth and integrity. Deciding to approach him, she moved gracefully across the room, offering him a polite smile as she reached his side. "Good evening, Mr. Randall. It's nice to see a familiar face." Mr. Randall raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise in his expression before he returned her smile, albeit cautiously. "Ms. White, I didn't expect to see you here." Ms. White nodded, her tone calm and sincere. "I was honored to be invited. Mr. Thompson thought it would be a good opportunity for me to connect with others in the industry. It's a chance I'm grateful for." Mr. Randall looked at her thoughtfully, studying her with a quiet intensity. "It seems you've changed, Ms. White. The woman I remember was, shall we say, more focused on competition than connection." Ms. White chuckled softly, acknowledging the truth in his words. "You're not wrong. I think I had a lot to learn, about myself and about others. I was so focused on proving myself that I didn't take the time to build the relationships that really matter." Mr. Randall's expression softened, his initial skepticism giving way to a look of respect. "It takes courage to admit something like that. Not many people in this business would." Ms. White gave a small smile, feeling a sense of relief and pride at the unexpected reconciliation. "Thank you, Mr. Randall. I think we all have things we need to work on. I'm just glad I finally recognized what I needed to change." They shared a brief, understanding nod before another jeweler joined their conversation, engaging them in a discussion about the latest gemstone trends. Ms. White found herself slipping comfortably into the flow of the conversation, surprised at how natural it felt to connect with others without the need for competition or pretense. As the evening continued, she met other designers and jewelers, each one sharing stories of their craft, their challenges, and their passion for the industry. Ms. White felt a renewed sense of purpose, as though she had finally found her place not only within her store, but within the larger world of jewelry. Toward the end of the night, she stood by the refreshment table, sipping a glass of sparkling water and reflecting on the evening. The nerves she'd felt earlier had dissolved, replaced by a quiet sense of pride and belonging. She knew she'd come a long way, and she was finally ready to let go of the past and embrace the person she had become. As she turned to leave, Mr. Thompson appeared beside her, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "I saw you speaking with Mr. Randall. You handled yourself well, Ms. White. It seems you've earned not only his respect, but that of many others tonight." Ms. White smiled, a gentle warmth spreading through her. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It means a lot to me. I've realized that there's so much more to this industry than just selling jewelry. It's about building connections, sharing knowledge, and helping people find something meaningful." Mr. Thompson nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "That's exactly right. And I couldn't think of anyone better to represent those values than you, Ms. White." They walked toward the exit together, the soft sounds of the gala fading behind them. As they stepped out into the crisp evening air, Ms. White took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment that she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice filled with gratitude, "for everything. For giving me the chance to change, to grow, and to make things right." He smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You earned it, Ms. White, and I have no doubt that you'll continue to make us proud." As she headed home that night, Ms. White felt a profound sense of closure. The evening had been more than just a professional event. It had been a symbolic end to her journey of self-discovery and transformation. She was no longer defined by the mistakes of her past. Instead, she was someone new, someone who valued kindness, connection, and integrity. With each step, she felt lighter, knowing that she was now walking forward on a path she had chosen, surrounded by the respect and trust she had worked so hard to earn. The morning was quiet as Ms. White arranged a new display near the entrance, the gentle hum of the city just beginning to wake outside the store's large windows. She glanced at her reflection in the glass, catching sight of the calm confidence that now rested in her own eyes, a stark contrast to the person she had been not so long ago. The doorbell chimed softly, signaling a new visitor. Ms. White turned, her warm smile ready as a young woman stepped inside, her eyes darting nervously around the store. She looked to be in her early 20s, with a soft, uncertain expression and hands that fidgeted with the strap of her purse. Ms. White sensed a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in her demeanor. "Good morning," Ms. White greeted gently, stepping forward to meet her. "Is there something I can help you with today?" The young woman glanced up, her cheeks flushing slightly. Hi. I'm not here to buy anything, actually." She paused, hesitating before continuing. "My name is Lily and, well, I was hoping to get some advice, if that's okay." Ms. White's interest was piqued. She hadn't expected a request for advice, but she could see that Lily had something weighing on her mind. "Of course, Lily. I'd be more than happy to help however I can. Why don't you come sit with me?" She guided Lily to a small seating area near the window, the morning sunlight casting a warm glow over the plush chairs. As they sat, Ms. White noticed Lily's hands trembling slightly, a sign of her nerves. "So, tell me," Ms. White prompted kindly, "what's on your mind?" Lily took a deep breath, glancing down at her lap before looking up, her eyes searching. I want to work with jewelry. It's been a dream of mine for years, but I don't have any experience. And every time I think about applying for a job or learning more, I feel like I'll never be good enough. Like I'll just mess it up." Ms. White felt a wave of empathy wash over her. She recognized the uncertainty, the self-doubt, the fear of failure. It was a feeling she had known well in her own journey. She reached out, placing a reassuring hand over Lily's. "Lily, I understand exactly how you feel. Starting something new, especially something you care so deeply about, can be terrifying. But let me tell you something I've learned. Every great journey begins with that first, uncertain step." Lily looked at her, a hint of relief mingling with her apprehension. "But what if I'm just not good at it? What if I'm not cut out for this?" Ms. White smiled gently, her voice soft but firm. "When I first started working with jewelry, I had no idea what I was doing. I made mistakes, more than I care to remember. And even after years in the business, I still struggled with things I didn't fully understand. But I learned, Lily. I learned through experience, through asking questions, and, most importantly, through making those mistakes." Lily bit her lip, nodding slowly. I guess I just don't want to disappoint anyone. Or myself." Ms. White's gaze softened as she remembered her own struggles. "Lily, disappointment only comes when we stop trying. It's okay to make mistakes. In fact, mistakes are a part of learning, of growing. And if this is truly your passion, then those mistakes will only make you stronger and more knowledgeable." A small smile tugged at the corners of Lily's mouth. Do you think I could really do it? I mean, I look at people like you, and it feels like you're all so confident, like you've always known what you're doing." Ms. White laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, Lily, if only you knew. Confidence isn't something we're born with. It's something we build, piece by piece, through experience. And you're not alone in this. Everyone who starts feels like they're not enough at some point. But it's about having the courage to keep going, even when you're uncertain." Lily's eyes sparkled with newfound hope, her shoulders relaxing slightly. I want to learn. I really do. I just don't know where to begin." Ms. White leaned back, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Well, How about this? I could teach you a few basics right here. You can get a feel for the craft, the materials, and maybe even help me with a few tasks around the store when you're ready." Lily's face lit up, her eyes widening with excitement. "Really? You'd do that for me?" Ms. White nodded, her heart warming at the sight of Lily's enthusiasm. "Of course, it would be my pleasure. And who knows, maybe you'll discover talents you didn't even know you had." Lily laughed softly, the sound filled with relief and joy. "Thank you, Ms. White. I didn't think anyone would give me a chance, especially with how little I know." Ms. White smiled, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. "We all start somewhere, Lily, and I can tell that you have the passion. That's the most important thing. Skills can be learned, but passion? That's rare." They spent the next hour together, with Ms. White showing Lily some of the fundamental aspects of jewelry design. The different types of gemstones, the importance of craftsmanship, and the meaning behind various pieces. She explained the value of understanding the story behind each item, the connection between the jeweler and the person who would eventually wear it. Lily listened intently, her eyes shining as she absorbed every word. She asked thoughtful questions, her curiosity blossoming with each new insight. Ms. White could see herself in Lily, that same spark, that same drive to learn and grow. As they wrapped up, Lily looked at Ms. White with gratitude. "Thank you so much for this. I feel like I can actually do this now. Like maybe I have a place here." Ms. White reached out, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You do, Lily. And remember, you're not alone. I'll be here to guide you, to answer your questions, and to support you every step of the way." Lily nodded, her expression filled with determination. "I won't let you down, Ms. White. I'm going to work hard and learn everything I can." Ms. White smiled, a deep sense of pride and contentment filling her. "I know you will, Lily, and I have no doubt that one day you'll be the one inspiring others, just like you're inspired now." As Lily left the store with a renewed sense of purpose, Ms. White watched her go, feeling a profound sense of closure. This was more than just helping a young woman find her way. It was a reminder of how far she herself had come. She had gone from someone lost in her own insecurities and judgments to someone capable of guiding others with kindness and understanding. Claire approached her, a knowing smile on her face. "Ms. White, I saw you talking to that young woman. It looked like something special." Ms. White nodded, her smile soft and thoughtful. "It was, Claire. I think I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. A chance to give back, to share what I've learned." Claire's smile widened. "You're really making a difference, Ms. White. Not just for us, but for the people who walk through these doors every day." Ms. White took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her transformation settle over her like a warm embrace. She had found her place, her purpose, and in guiding Lily, she knew she was honoring the journey that had brought her here. "Yes, Claire," she replied softly, "and it feels right. This is where I'm meant to be." As she returned to her work, Ms. White felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. Her journey had come full circle, and now, as a mentor and guide, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. As we reach the end of Katie's story, there's a powerful lesson to take with us. Every person deserves respect, regardless of how they look or who they appear to be. Moments like these remind us that assumptions, especially those based on appearance, can lead to profound harm. Katie's story also reveals how standing up for ourselves, and for others, can inspire real change. Her father's influence wasn't just about power, but about protecting those he loves and promoting justice. And for each of us, it's a call to recognize our own biases, to act with kindness, and to take a stand against unfair treatment wherever we see it. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to stay connected to more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think we can each make a difference in our daily lives?